I'd like to call to order the City of San Carlos City Council Successor Agency to the Redevelopment Agency Housing Authority regular meeting for March 26, 2018. And I'd like to welcome the San Mateo County Sheriff's Color Guard, which will now come up, and we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. So after they come up, please rise. right. Go down. The next item is changes to the order of the agenda. Is there any changes to the order of the agenda? All right, hearing none. Report from closed session, Mr. Rubens.
There's no report from closed session.
All right, thank you. Next is presentation, administration of oath of office to our new Chief of Police, Mark Dury. So, Crystal, if you would do the honors. Mark, welcome.
Thank you.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that you bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California, that you take this obligation freely without any purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties for which you are about to enter?
I do.
Thank you.
Chief, comments?
I guess that's as good as it's going to get. Good evening, everyone. I'm incredibly honored and humbled to be standing here tonight as your new bureau chief for the city of San Carlos. First and foremost, I'm excited to officially join and be a part of such an exceptional organization. I'm eager to get out and engage in constructive dialogue with community members and city staff. We will build upon the great work that was accomplished under Assistant Sheriff Greg Roth's leadership. My primary objective as your police chief is to ensure the continued safety and security of the city. The city of San Carlos places a high value on people and service to the community, and I cannot think of any more important thing than that. This is more than a job to all of us. This is a commitment that we make to hold ourselves to the highest standard possible, a pledge to continually put others before ourselves, and the responsibility to dedicate our lives to making a positive impact on the world around us. I'm incredibly grateful for the unwavering support of my family. To my dad, thanks to you and Mom for teaching and inspiring me to be the very best from the very beginning and teach me the importance of hard work, dedication, and all the work that we can accomplish together, especially teamwork. We can get more accomplished working together than we could ever hope to do alone. To my wife, Alyssa, thank you for encouraging me to pursue this life. I know it isn't easy. It requires our family to bear the burden of long hours, empty dinner tables, and great risks. It's also highly rewarding, and I'm grateful to have the career that is so meaningful. To Rihanna and Dante, thank you, and thank you for making it so easy and fun to be your dad. You have always pushed me to be the very best, and I hope in return, we've taught you that making a difference for others surpasses just about anything else. And thank you to my coworkers and friends. New and old, you came tonight to support me. I'm here because of your mentoring, guidance, care, and most importantly, your friendship. I would like to thank City Manager Malpe and Sheriff Bolanos for entrusting me with this position, one that I don't take for granted. Under these two outstanding leaders, I will continue to work hard for each and every one of you and for the community we serve. After working 29 years with the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office, I've become familiar with the excellent reputation that San Carlos has. I cannot wait to build on that. San Carlos is a unique and special city, and there's truly nowhere I'd rather be serving as your police chief. Thank you so much for your time and your support. Thank you.
Welcome. I'm sure on behalf of the council and all the citizens, we welcome you to San Carlos, and we know you're going to do a great job. Did you want to take some pictures with your family up here or anything? Or you guys have time for that? We have time. We have time if you have time. If you want to take some, yeah, if somebody have a camera that's going to take pictures, nobody brought a camera. Somebody has to have a camera. Why don't we get some pictures with the family, father and everybody? Get everybody up here. No, that's all right. Forget the mayor. The mayor doesn't need to be. And there is no requirement that you have to stay for the entire 3.5 hours or 4 hours. Because I expect, yeah. Boy, that was quick. You have homework. How about homework? Dante, you got homework to do, right? I think mom just left. You better take off. Thank you for coming. All right. All right. The next item is 5B, presentation on, and thanks to all the officers and all the folks that showed up for this, and maybe staying for part of it again. But it's great to have all the support of your comrades when you're doing this stuff. So, thank you all for coming. I'll let you. If you're going to be leaving now, that's fine. I'll take a second or two, and you can all take off if you need to, or you can stay for the 3.5 hours, whatever you want to. Should have introduced. Amy, could you do me a favor? Maybe just close the door so then, because they'll probably be out there for a while. Oh, you got it? Thank you, sir. Never mind, done already. Thank you. All set. All right, so the next item on our agenda is item 5B, presentation of the city's new website. Tara, is that your gig? And what all the people who know all about it aren't here?
Yes. Good evening, Council. And my name is Tara Peterson. Tonight, my hat, right now anyway, is Assistant City Manager.
Just wait 5 minutes. Yeah.
Right now, we're trying to get the internet up. The internet is down. So what we're going to do is postpone until maybe later in the agenda to try to see if we can resolve the problem. Otherwise, we'll bring it back another time.
That'd be great. If not, we can just have the new website on the next agenda. So, not a problem.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tara. Okay. All right, moving along. Next item is public comment. This is for persons wishing to address the City Council on items not on the posted agenda. And normally we limit this to 2 minutes. So is anyone here wishing to speak on any item that is not on the posted agenda? All right, moving on. Move on to the consent calendar. These items are usually done by one motion. Is there anyone wishing to pull any of the items on the consent calendar, either from the public or staff or the dais? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move approval of the consent calendar.
All right.
Items A through I.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. Any further discussion? If not, roll call, please.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
And Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. All right. Moving on. Reports to council. Reports to council are updates on key city projects by city department heads and staff and city council subcommittees. They're informational in nature. No action will be taken on any of these items at this meeting. So we have a report to council on the annual update on police services. And I would assume Assistant Sheriff Greg Rothis would be doing that, but I don't know, because obviously our new chief is brand new. And Assistant Sheriff Greg Rothis. Thank you.
Okay. The clicker is there.
Good evening, Mayor Grisili, members of the City Council. Greg Rothis, your former police chief, that's about 4 minutes ago. And I'm here to do the annual report to Council. I come back every year. Part of the contract is that we report out annually just basically on crime and police services of the year before. What we do when we measure crime, we measure what are called Part 1 crimes, and you see them up there on the slide. Obviously, that's not all the crimes there are, but for us, it's just a standard, very much like, you know, a standard in the stock index or something like that. It's something that we follow. We watch them rise and fall, and we have a pretty good idea of what's going on crime-wise in any community or across the country. And this is what the trends have been with respect to Part 1 crimes in San Carlos. You know, this has been, you can see not a lot of variation year to year, and you can see that the trend line for it has been down since 2009. The Sheriff's Office took over policing for the city of San Carlos in the end of 2010, and so we've seen a slow downward trend in crime since that time. And I think that's really remarkable considering how vibrant the community is and how many more people are coming here, how much more traffic we have coming through here. How many more businesses and opportunities for crime there are here, but we've been able to keep crime rates really pretty low. With respect to violent crime, it's pretty much fallen off the cliff, thankfully. We really don't have much of it at all. Last year I came to council and I had to tell you that we had to check the numbers, I think 3 times to confirm that violent crime rate was so low. But violent crime in San Carlos is virtually non-existent. Some of those numbers that you see, for example, robbery numbers, when we're talking robberies in San Carlos, it's usually not involving weapons, it's usually involving force. So an example is when somebody steals something at Home Depot, that's a theft. But if the security guard tries to detain him and they push the security guard away and run away, that's a robbery, considered a violent crime. Nobody's hurt in the process and there's no weapons involved, but it's technically a violent crime. And that's, a significant number of our violent crimes are composed of those. So it's a very safe community that way. Residential burglaries, you remember the story of 2015. I think we'll never forget that. I'll never forget that. I know that. But it's really dropped off the cliff in 2017. In fact, in 2017, I can't remember ever having fewer residential burglaries in this community than we did last year. I checked around regionally, and it is a regional trend too. It's nothing that us got the benefit of, but a lot of other neighboring communities also saw a drop in that, and we hope that will continue because that is really the best news, in my opinion, all year. In addition to all this, those numbers, we monitor things such as our case clearance rates, and when you saw those in the staff report, I don't have slides there, but you can see that our case clearance rates, when you compare what's going on statewide, are really very good. With respect, another thing that we watch very closely is our emergency response times. How quick can we get to an emergency call? And we've been able to consistently do that in under 4 minutes. And I actually check every single one and confirm every single time and then hand calculate the times myself because it's such an important measurement. People want to know that if they call the police, if they really need us and it's an emergency, that we're going to get there very fast. And the data shows we're going to get there very fast. So that's another data point we watched. One that we saw was a little troubling was an increase in accidents, a little bit of a decrease in our injury accidents, but an increase in accidents overall, so we'll have to watch that. In addition to some of those data, in addition to some of that data, we do a lot of work with the schools. I think I listed in the staff report, we're there for school security. We're there for important programs like bullying. We're there to deal with troubled kid. Lately, we've been there a lot on threats of school violence. That's been really popular, unfortunately, lately. So we're working with the schools on things like that. You see us at the community events at large, whether it's Hometown Days or Night of Lights or those kind of things. We always like to have a high presence at those events. We've worked on some of the homeless issues, and I know I've communicated with some of you in the council on the homelessness in San Carlos, and we have that sometimes here. Our objective in homeless situations is not just to move them on to somewhere else, but to find resources for them, if there's a way that we can help them, and to get them into a shelter or somewhere where they can be much safer and more comfortable, rather than just moving them along. And that's our goal. And we also have the psychological emergency response team. They're actually housed here in San Carlos. The Sheriff's Office has that team, and it's comprised of a detective and a behavioral health professional. We have mental health issues in this community, as do all communities, and when they're significant, we dispatch that team to work with them and to make sure that they have resources and that we don't get return calls, and we can find some real permanent help for these people. So, you know, and again, in addition to all the hard measures of crime, there's all these soft measures and all these other things that we do here for the community we've done since we've came in 2010. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has them.
Okay, thanks, Chief. Mr. Olbert?
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Sheriff. Really appreciate that. You touched on one thing that I wanted to get a little bit more color on, and this is obviously purely anecdotal, but both personally and from the feedback I get from other members of the community involving vehicular stuff, if they're not complaining about parking and the problems in finding parking, it's almost always about what I think of as traffic behavior. You know, just somebody was telling me the other day, it seems like almost every stop sign in San Carlos is viewed as optional now by a lot of people. So I'm curious, you mentioned that we have seen an uptick in traffic-related stuff, fortunately not injury ones, as you said. Is this a regional issue? Are there any thoughts percolating about maybe changes in best practices that we could follow, or is there an opportunity to do more enforcement, or what?
You know, that's a good question. I wouldn't know whether it's regional. I'm not in touch with the other neighboring jurisdictions' traffic situations, but I am curious about it, and it certainly is something that I think, you know, that the city can focus on this coming year in terms of taking a look at it and a deeper dive, you know, analytically to find out why and where these accidents are occurring. And so we plan to doing that in all our bureaus in the coming years, to focus much stronger on the traffic piece and to get more information. But again, it's hard to say what other communities, you know, are experiencing, but traffic is a complaint. It is an increasing complaint. I know with all the cities, I hear it with other police chiefs, and you know, they get the same thing in their councils, and their police chiefs hear the same thing that we do in their communities, whether it's Redwood City, Belmont, and you know, we've driven through those communities, and we know why. So no one's immune.
And I know based on our prior conversations offline, you don't necessarily see that as an opportunity or a situation where perhaps we ought to step up the enforcement levels, enforcement resources, basically.
You know, I think we need to do a better job in terms of the analysis piece. And I think, you know, that would be a great place to start. And, but in terms of the enforcement piece and how much, it's really a discretionary spending on the part of the city in many ways, right? So some cities don't even have a traffic motor. They don't have any. Some are very, very into it. We rate at the high end by having 2 for 30,000 people. And so if the city wanted to do more, really said, hey, you know, we'd like to do more, it can be done. We can put more traffic out and we can do more traffic enforcement. But that's a discretionary decision on the part of the city. I do know from the last stats that we saw with respect to general safety, there's a program called SWITTers, and it's an acronym, and I'm supposed to know what it means, otherwise the mayor, but I don't know what that one.
Just don't use it.
Okay, okay.
Or make one up. He won't know either.
Yeah, let's make one up. I don't know the difference.
Statewide traffic something, and basically it's a traffic safety index. And the last time I saw it, we're like in, you know, 70% of the cities about our size are less safer on the roads than we are. So we're not in a bad spot in terms of safety the last time I checked. But, you know, if you're the person that's involved in the accident, you're the one that lost the property, you or your family member, the one that got hurt, that's the one that counts to you. So.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Mr. Procott?
Question and then a comment. So the charts, the bar graphs you gave show violent crime down, residential burglary down, but Part 1 crimes are up. Am I to understand that residential and violent are in the Part 1?
Yes, sir. And the reason is because a lot of it has to do with, number one is auto burglary. We're getting clobbered with auto burglaries.
So that's why that's what was going to be my follow-up question, is why that bar is up. And what you're saying is because people breaking into cars and so forth.
Yeah, that's gone up all over region. It's regional as well. Other communities are worse, but it was up last year. It was up the year before, and it's up again this year.
And I know you've tried to work with the community because people have this misconception, really, that San Carlos, you know, it's a relatively safe place, especially, you know, if you compare it to some areas of the Bay Area, we're very safe. But I know you've tried to communicate with people that regardless of safe or not safe, leaving things exposed in your vehicle, unlocked, so forth, is not a good idea. But can you hit on that a little bit?
We spend a lot of time on the community notifications spiel. We've sent postcards and flyers to every house on residential burglary. We've done some stuff on the website. We've created a professionally produced video with a marketing company that the city hired to show and to place that video out and get that to the public so they can see and understand it. Certainly with respect to community meetings, we do our press releases, we get it all out there. The one downside of living in a safe community is people think that nothing's going to happen here. And, you know, I tell people all the time in public meetings, if you leave something of value in your car in San Carlos, eventually you're going to get ripped off, and there's probably not much the police are going to be able to do, unfortunately. The solvability rate of those crimes is about 4%, and we recover property in maybe 25% of those cases because it's so fast. People look around, they don't see anything, they either reach in or they break the window really quick and they grab the backpack and keep going.
And how much of those auto break-ins are, I'm not going to say where it is, but there's one hot spot that we've had trouble with, right?
Yes.
Relative to a particular restaurant. How much of those break-ins are part of that auto burglary? Is it a pretty high percentage, or?
It was, but it's dropped off a lot. We finally were able to get some really good participation from the restaurant. And we also put one of the ALPRs out there, and I think that word might have got around too. So, but it's been, you know, we don't like to say this in my business, you have to knock on wood, but it's been quite a while since we had one there, and I'm thankful for that.
Yeah. And then my comment is, because I've made it to some of your officers, has to do with the intersection at El Camino and Holly. And there's I think 2 right turn lanes there. And there's a tendency not to stop, or to stop and then sneak into the intersection and botch up the whole intersection, because when the light turns green for those who are trying to go eastbound on Holly, the light turns green, you can't go anywhere because there's half a dozen cars sitting in the intersection trying to make a right turn, or, you know, easing through there. And I just, you know, I've like I said, I've mentioned it to some of your officers before. I've sent some pictures, I think, to you.
Seen them?
And I really think we have an issue there, and I don't know what the solution is, but I think it needs to be addressed. So just.
Well, we can certainly watch it for the enforcement pieces of it, which is running the red light and blocking the intersection and things like that. So, you know, when I leave here today, I can make sure that it gets on our complaint list.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. Thanks, Greg. You mentioned school violence. You know, as a parent, I got an email from the superintendent today saying that there had been some threat in the county and that there was going to be some increased police presence. I wanted, you know, it's obviously unsettling as a parent, and I think I've heard that from other members of the community today. I wondered if you could just maybe add a little bit of color to that specific incident, but also anything that you wanted to share about what the Sheriff's Department is doing around schools. How do you guys react when you get these kinds of threats? Any other thoughts in that regard?
Yeah, sure. With respect to the threats themselves, you know, it's not an exaggeration. It seems like in our jurisdictions, we get one a day almost lately after Florida. And it's the same regionally. And, you know, the other police chiefs, when we go in the meeting, yeah, they're getting them every day. And it's kids who understand or you know, they're kids, and they think there's some big attention and they're big shot by getting the attention that comes from making these threats. We checked them all out, and we are actually working one right now that just came in from a San Carlos school. You know, and again, we're at the person's house, we're with their family, we're meeting with the family, and we're going to find, I think, what we always find on these. They don't have any guns. The kid's not going to do anything. He was popping off in front of his friends. But what we do when we look at it is we treat every one of them like it could happen. So rather than just having them say they don't have guns, we run people out in the home. We get consent searches. We check family members to see if they have any histories. And we work directly with the schools on this. We're in a strong partnership with the schools and really strong communication. We work with behavioral health in our PERT teams on things like that because there may be some psychological elements, so we'll bring them in on occasion. Then we'll have officers at the school and deputies at the school. We're flooding the schools now. We'll be at this school tomorrow morning. And so it's, you know, the interesting thing is they are all, we really believe all of them, the ones that we've seen, are kids who are showing off and trying to be big in front of their friends and trying to be the big man on campus. And none of them are valid, but we treat them all like they're real.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Collins?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I apologize if somebody answered. I was making some notes. On the accidents, you said there had been a significant increase, non-injury accidents.
And reported in non-injury accidents with a slight decrease in injury accidents. And we really watch the injury accidents most, so I'm not really confident about the non-injury accident data because a lot of times it's people can exchange names or they can take our police report, whatever they want to do, and it just depends, you know? So not all non-injury accidents are reported to us. You know, what I do watch carefully is the injury accidents because those are all reported to us. So I'm glad to see that they've gone down, but they've gone down from a number last year that was pretty high. So, you know, it's, that's kind of where we are with respect to accidents, and that's where I put the most faith is in the injury accident numbers. Thanks.
Okay. Well, Chief, Assistant Sheriff. Got to get the titles right here.
Once the chief, always the chief.
Yeah, that's true. Once a chief, always a chief. Thanks, Greg. I appreciate it. And we'll go on to the next item then, which is 9A, which is a study session, report to council on security options for the youth center. Amy, okay.
Good evening, Mayor Grisilli, council members, and members of the community. Amy Newby, Parks and Recreation Director. Tonight, I will be discussing some security options to be considered for the youth center. The Youth Center After School Drop-In program has on average 75 youth participants each day. Program staff include a full-time recreation coordinator, a part-time program coordinator, and between 6 to 8 part-time recreation leaders. When participants arrive to the youth center, they're required to leave their backpacks and belongings along the front window, visible by staff. After the remodel, the facility will have new backpack storage hooks where they will keep their backpacks, and again will be visible by front desk staff. All youth center staff are assigned to rooms throughout the facility to supervise and lead activities with participants. As discussed last month, the youth center will be undergoing a remodel, which is scheduled to begin by the end of April. At the time council approved the project, it was also requested for staff to provide a report of various security options to be considered for the youth center, which I'll review with you this evening. The first option would be to install surveillance cameras. Cameras would be installed inside and or outside the facility. If installed inside the youth center, cameras would be located in the front lobby, TV room, activity room, gym, homework room, arts and crafts room, and dance studio. If installed outside, cameras would be placed at the front entrance of the youth center, along the side of the youth center facing the fields, and in the back area of Les Mendel Grove. This option would require a one-time upfront cost to the city to purchase equipment and would require the time of certain identified full-time staff to review camera footage if a request was made. There would be negligent ongoing maintenance or future repair costs. The second option to consider is a panic button. This button would be installed under the front desk, out of sight from general patrons, and would be used to lock all exterior doors, as well as be set up as a direct emergency call to dispatch. The panic button, again, would be a one-time cost to the city with minimal ongoing maintenance or future repair costs. The third option would be to set up metal detectors at the front entrance of the youth center. Youth would be required to pass through the metal detectors to have access into the facility. This option would require a uniformed sheriff's deputy or security guard to be on site supervising the operations. This option is a one-time cost to purchase the metal detector ranging from $2,000 to $5,000 and would also require significant ongoing personnel costs for the deputy or security guard. Although this is an option to be considered tonight, the youth center is not considered a high threat environment. The last option is to have a uniformed sheriff's deputy on site during the after-school drop-in program, which equates to approximately 20 hours per week, not including the full days the program is open during school breaks. This option poses challenges to staff and high ongoing costs to the city to staff a deputy. A modified option of this would be to work with the sheriff's office to schedule deputies to assist with larger special events at the youth center, such as our dances. Scheduling regular shift deputies would be the ideal scenario. However, if one was not available, additional deputy staff would need to be brought in, which could require additional overtime costs to fulfill this plan. Staff reached out to cities along the peninsula to request information on what security programs other cities have implemented. 3 agencies reported back they use surveillance cameras either in their community centers or parks. Several agencies had looked into installing security cameras but opted not to in the end. One agency reported back they installed panic buttons at the front desk of their community center. One button locks all exterior doors, and another button is used as a direct call to their agency's dispatch. Tonight, council may choose an option presented to you for staff to pursue further. Staff may be able to incorporate option 1 or 2 into the planned remodel this year. However, option 3 or 4 will require further discussions with the sheriff's office prior to implementation. Funding would also be needed to hire a consultant specializing in school security to identify most viable options, determine industry best practices, and to assist with the implementation of such options. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right, thank you. Mr. Olbert?
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Amy. Good presentation. I'm in sort of thinking about the options and maybe some other things too. I'm trying to wrap my mind around what's the likely set of threats that a facility like the youth center would be facing. And what I mean by that is, I think when we were talking about it last time, when we were talking about having adult use at the center, I know I brought up the discussion of saying we want to make sure when we're mixing adults and kids that, because inappropriate behavior sometimes takes place, that we manage that. That's sort of an internal thing, right? Where you have to, if you're going to put technology against that, you'd be putting video cameras inside to monitor stuff, so people would perhaps hesitate to do things because they'd see themselves on camera. But I'm not sure that's necessarily the best way to deal with that kind of threat. And the outside cameras, unless I'm missing something, that's primarily, isn't it, for like stopping burglaries or break-in or vandalism, that kind of thing. I guess maybe so as I don't blither here too much, just in general, when you think about the 4 different options you presented, what types of threats are they each trying to go after? Or are they just, those are the ideas you came up with and you didn't analyze it from that point of view?
I think we just looked at any possible threats that the youth center could potentially have, from theft, from violence, and looking at the reality of what we see day to day. Our staff is really good at keeping a communications log, and so reviewing the last 2 months of that communications log. More incidents that have occurred are minimal theft from backpacks, which once staff get involved, those incidents tend to be resolved. On the outside of the youth center, we do see a lot of vandalism kind of outside. The windows in the back have been broken a few times. We see some other vandalism in Burton Park, whether it's to the outdoor stage or play equipment. We don't tend to see a lot of vandalism inside the youth center just because it's so well staffed. And I think just hearing from Assistant Sheriff Rothis in the presentation before, they treat every threat like it's the real thing, but or just what he said earlier. Just taking that into consideration for the youth center and our operations and the threats.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Grocott.
So I wanted to find out on the security options where the sheriff's deputies are on site. Currently, I have a couple questions there. Currently, when there are special events, what typically is the coverage by the sheriff's department on those events?
They're only called if needed at this point, so there isn't a proactive approach to have them on site during these events. And mostly because there's rarely an occurrence that happens where we need their assistance, if it's an altercation between participants or students, and that's when they get called in. I think that happened once last year.
And maybe this is a question for the department more directly, is if they might want to speak to how they treat those events. They know they're going on. Are they doing anything special with their patrols on those when those events are scheduled? And then just on a day-to-day basis, how often do they make, just doing a drive-by of the youth center something that's a routine for their patrol officers? I don't know if you want to answer that, or maybe Greg wants to come up and talk to that.
When we're aware of an event at the youth center, then the patrol will make passing checks of that event and go by, providing that we don't have any calls and everything elsewhere. Our experience has been that with the events at the youth center, they're well run, they're usually very safe, and it's very rare that we get called to anything there. So we don't really deal with the big crime issues or violent issues there, except on rare occasion it does happen. When we're aware, we will make passing checks. And then in terms of how often do we do just routine patrols?
Hold on a second. I just want to make sure I understand that. So when an event's going on, your patrol officers are made aware, sure, and they might just do, without being called, they might just do a drive-by and show their presence.
Sure. Or they may just go there and park their car and stay there for a while.
Right. Okay.
And hang out.
Yeah.
Just to kind of set a tone, you know?
Sure.
Not on a contracted basis, or it's just part of their patrol. Whoever the beat deputy happens to be, you're aware of things going on in your beat, and you give them some attention.
Okay.
In terms of how often we do that routinely, we would have no way of really checking that, except to say that we do, obviously, spend a lot of time in our parks and schools.
Mm-hmm. So it is done.
Yes.
Yeah, it's okay. And you're probably the best one for this. So we've been given all these different options. The efficacy of any one of them, if we're going to be spending city dollars on something, anything that you see in here that you would think, by your professional opinion, would be a better use of our funds than any other?
People, there's really two issues at play. First of all, what is the real threat and real security issues and violent concerns with respect to the youth center? And then the second is, what is the community's tolerance for that level, whatever that level happens to be? The level's really very low, and it's been a rare instance that we've had these types of things. This community is culturally, what I've learned from 13 years of being here, is very sensitive to crime issues, and they get wound up really quickly. Fortunately, when we take care of business, they're also very appreciative. So it's really a way, it's for the council to take a look at those two issues. What is the threat, and what is community's tolerance for that level of threat? And here are our options.
Okay.
All right. Mr. Collins? I'm sorry, are you?
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Collins?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess, Amy, I guess it's you. You're up. The panic button seems like an interesting, easy option, but then I got to thinking about it. Who would be in charge of it? Would it be an adult? Would it be a student?
It would be located at the front desk, which depends on what staff would be assigned to the front desk, as young as 16 and then through an adult.
And what about, I mean, how would you guard against like a false alarm, false setting off, somebody's playing with it, somebody discovers it? I know it's impossible, it's not a perfect world, but
right.
How would you guard against
It's
that?
hard to say, but the intent would be for it to be installed where it wouldn't just get bumped if someone is working the front desk. This particular option has been implemented with the city of Redwood City at their community center. And I did not hear of any accidental pushes of the button to where these emergency services were dispatched for no reason. So it would just be placed strategically.
Do you know of an instance where they actually had to use it? Are you aware of it?
Not for lockdown. It may have been used to call dispatch in an emergency.
So what kinds of actions would someone be witnessing that would give them cause to consider pushing it or just push it? I mean, is it something do they feel a threat to their personal safety? Or, I mean, obviously there's obvious things, but
Yeah.
is there like a criteria that they would have to consider?
Well, I think if an option were to be pursued, we would work very closely with the sheriff's office in staff training to identify those scenarios, and they would be able to provide our staff with just the right tools and understanding to know when that threat is there.
Okay. All right. Well, you answered my last question, which was what kind of training would be involved. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Johnson?
Thank you. Thank you, Amy and Greg. My question is, would staff recommend that we implement any of these options? Do you think any of these are needed, warranted? Would you suggest, like if it was your decision, what would you do in this case?
Like I said, I think there's those two factors that I said to consider. One more is that you have a limited pool of public safety dollars. So whatever public safety dollars that you have, how much of those you want to go to the youth center. I think what I could objectively say is the youth center is a very safe place to have events for kids. I've been here for 13 years. We rarely have problems at the youth center. It does happen from time to time. I mean, you know, we've had homicides in San Carlos. We've had, but this is certainly not a murder capital. We've had robberies, armed robberies. It's very rare. And we'll have events at the youth center from time to time, but they're very rare. But it's just a matter of, you know, it's really part of feeling the community and seeing how much will they tolerate part of it. And that's, but in terms of the objective, I just don't think I need to staff a full-time deputy at the youth center.
That I get. So maybe specifically option 1 and 2, do you think they add any public safety benefit to have a panic button or a security camera?
I think panic button, yes. I think security camera, yes. I think those are always good to have. If you have to train on them right, those can be very good to have, especially with what's going on out there. It really gives the people on site a sense of security. Cameras have really saved us in so many cases with respect to criminal investigation. So with respect to those security measures, I think they're valuable.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Albert again.
Hey, Mr. Mayor, just a quick question for either Amy or perhaps Jeff, I'm not sure who. Rough order of magnitude, can you sketch in what the costs of the various options are?
I don't have the cost for the panic button. Security cameras are pretty affordable. I would say under $5,000 to have them, to purchase and install them. The panic button, I don't know, it just requires some electrical work.
Networking, right? Yeah. We haven't done the budget estimates yet. We were looking for direction from the council tonight, and then given where we're at in our budget process, if there was favorable direction, we thought we'd include it as a budget option, so you're not committed financially tonight to anything?
I understand, but I think you can understand my next comment, which is that all these things depend on money in an extent. So just look, order of magnitude.
Right.
If we were to put a reasonable number of cameras looking externally, are we talking $100,000, $10,000, $250,000? Panic button, is it, you know, where does it fall?
Well, let's say all in, and this is back of the envelope, $100,000 for the panic button, the cameras all installed and networked. We're going to have to be making a connection to the 911 center. Okay. So it's not just a device you can plug in.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got our questions. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Greg. So we want to give direction to, if we want to staff on security options. Personally, I think I don't know that you might be a little high on. I don't know. Maybe I'm just naive. Of course, Mr. Technology here. I'm the least person probably for dollars, but I would think 1 and 2 would be reasonable and possibly within our budget. 3 and 4, I think, would be. I think it's a little bit of a overkill situation.
Be careful, Mr. Mayor. You realize you are being recorded, and if you quote a low price, we may have the contract turned over to you.
Oh, that's true. That's true. And of course, I am so technology oriented. Anyway, just personal opinion. I mean, direction for me, and me and the other gentleman need to speak. 1 and 2 would be one that I would like staff to look at.
I would concur with that suggestion.
Yeah, I'd like to see a little bit more fleshed out 1 and 2 as well.
Okay, Mr. Grocott, did you have some other comment?
Yeah, I appreciated the sheriff's comments on when they have special events, but I'm just curious if we might want something that doesn't contract it, but formalizes it a little bit more, that when there's dances and so forth. And you know, my concern there is not so much, you know, kids who live in our community, but when you have an event like that, and it gets spread around. I know, you know, my son's at Carlmont, and things that go on at Sequoia and San Mateo and so forth, it gets around. And so when there's an event going on, kids will show up, right, who don't live in the community, and some of those can be bad actors. And so I think just having something that doesn't, like I said, doesn't put it into the contract necessarily. I don't know, Greg, if it's possible to do that, but just give some kind of direction from council that we'd like to see, you know, some type of presence when we have those events, that an officer goes by, and so it's not just so laissez-faire that the policy. I don't know if the rest of the council, you know, wants to jump on that or not, but.
I look at the history of it, and as Greg said, apparently it's just, I mean, the youth center's been open for a lot of years now. We've had a lot of events. How many events do we have every year? 10, 15, 20? 10 at least, so at least it's been at least 100 events, if not even more. And so I look at the history, and since it's been good, I think whatever they're doing, I think it's working out, but we'll see. Maybe, like I don't want to formalize it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, at this point, I'm not terribly crazy about formalizing it either, mostly because I frankly expected that Greg and I expect that Mark will do a good job and deploy the resources as appropriate.
Okay, so direction, staff has direction? We're good? All right, thank you very much. Moving on, item 10, public hearing, consideration of adopting a resolution authorizing expenditures in the not to exceed amount of $100,000 in the Supplemental Law Enforcement Special Funds, SLESF, to be used to support frontline law enforcement services by partially funding a traffic deputy.
Good evening, Greg Rothis again. And every year for the past 6 years, I've been approached the City Council with this grant fund. This is a state grant. We get approximately $100,000 annually, and we're allowed to use that money to provide frontline public safety services outside of the normal budget process in a way that that the council chooses to use it. And my job is to make recommendations each year for that use. And each year for the past 6 years, we've recommended that we fund that second traffic motor position with it. We fully fund one traffic motor deputy in the budget, but this grant helps us to fund the second traffic motor deputy. We've been doing that every year. That is a current recommendation to do that. Traffic is obviously something that's very important in this community. By having 2 full-time dedicated traffic deputies, we're really well positioned with respect to traffic enforcement, you know, especially when you compare us to our neighboring jurisdictions. Obviously, we did see that rise in those property damage accidents, some fall in the injury accidents, but there's still a need out there, and the complaints are there. So the second motor is very helpful, and we'll recommend that we use those funds for the same purpose this year.
Okay, any questions?
Just one quick one.
Mr. Olbert?
Thank you. Just to be clear, Greg, because I've gotten some questions from members of the public, we're not talking about funding an additional position. This is continued funding of an existing position.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the dais? This is a public hearing. Is there anyone wishing to speak on this item from the public? Okay, hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we close the public hearing.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, I moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. So, gentlemen, what do you want to do on this one?
Mr. Mayor, I would move to adopt Resolution 2018-37,
37.
a resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos authorizing expenditures in the not-to-exceed amount of $100,000 in the Supplemental Law Enforcement Special Funds, SLESF, to be used to support frontline law enforcement services by partially funding a traffic deputy.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
And Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. All right, thank you very much. Moving on to item 11A. Consideration of adopting a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement to purchase and install an automated license plate readers, ALPRS, at one intersection from Vigilant Technologies in the amount of $118,172.18, increasing the appropriations budget in the amount of $125,000, and changing the ALPR data retention period from 6 months to 1 year.
That's correct. Good evening again. As you know, we currently have approximately 11 ALPRs in use in the community right now. And this is for an additional, this is to wire up an additional intersection. Just a little bit of background so everybody understands what we're talking about with an ALPR system. It essentially incorporates 2 cameras, one infrared and one's a picture camera. And they're both mounted into a single housing. And we have those either on mobile or fixed sites. And we have both deployed in San Carlos. And essentially what it does is it's able to read those license plates, it scans those license plates that it sees on cars coming by, and it can compare them with certain hot lists, and it also stores those license plates into a database. And then the law enforcement, as I said, you can compare those license plates with any hot list, whether or not it's wanted for a crime, whether the car is stolen, whether there's a missing person in it, whether the subject in that car is a witness in a crime or whatnot. And we're able to make, helps with criminal investigations. And those are all the kind of feedback information that we have with respect to these cameras. You know, one of the biggest concerns obviously has been on ALPRs has been the civil liberties concerns around them. People who are not disobeying any laws are really not keen in terms of having their data or anybody scanning what they're not doing anything to break the law. So what we've done, what the sheriff has done is, the sheriff really believes the tools are valuable. I'm going to talk about why specifically we believe they're valuable here in just a moment. But we also want to really respect the civil liberties concerns of others. So what we did several months back is we reached out to the ACLU and gave them a copy of our policy that was in place. And we asked them to provide input on that policy. What would they do to make that policy better, and how would they enhance it? And what you see below is some of the recommendations from the ACLU. We had training requirements, but the ACLU wanted more specifics in that, and we included that. They wanted, we said that we would report out to councils. They wanted to make that something mandatory, so we put that in the policy. Requirement for specific elements of the reports to be given to council, not just an annual report, but exactly what we're going to tell the councils in the future, what prohibited uses are, and that deployment of them would only be permitted after a city council presentation. So we accepted every single recommendation of the ACLU. Our policy incorporates all of their recommendations, and they were very pleased and happy that we sought their advice and input, and we've carried out in all cases. Well, you're going to get a recommendation from me later on data retention. I'm asking for an extension to a year. The ACLU is not excited about that. They don't like longer data retention periods. You may hear about that tonight. But the policy that we developed with them allows any council to shorten a data retention period, to lengthen it, or do whatever they want to do. So our policy is still consistent with their practice, because you can absolutely keep it 6 months, make it a year, or shorten it. All councils will have that option. Who has access to our data for ALPRs? It's really authorized sheriff's personnel, our deputies and dispatchers, crime analysts, and our sheriff's IT personnel who manage the system. Only those law enforcement agencies that we grant or share access with can have access to our information. What the data is used, it's being used for official law enforcement businesses only. Any other use other than that is violation of policy, and it could be a violation of criminal law, and whoever does that is subject to prosecution. We use it for follow-up investigations. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Identify suspect vehicles, and I'll tell you specific cases of that. All use is logged and audited. We do not grant any access to our information to ICE. No data is shared with ICE, so they have no access to ours. Some states adopt legislation with respect to data retention. Vermont, for example, 18 months. New Jersey, as long as 60 months. The San Mateo County Sheriff's Office in our jurisdiction, data is retained for 12 months except San Carlos. It's the only city. I checked with the NCRIC. They say they have about 50 contributing communities into the ALPR database, and there's only 2 that have a 6-month period, and that's San Carlos and Menlo Park. We audit, again, we regularly audit it and of the ALPR data and make sure that only people who are trained to use it can use it. So with respect to when I brought this to council a couple of years ago, obviously we talked about its value with law enforcement. I knew this was going to be a valuable tool, and because I knew it had been a valuable tool elsewhere. But I wanted some specifics with respect to our area and how ALPRs have been successful in investigations. So I asked one of our detectives if he had any success stories. And he told me, yeah, I have a bunch. How many do you want? I said, can you write down 10? He said, sure. He wrote down 10 success stories with ALPRs, just one of our 40 detectives in the sheriff's office. And I had those in a day or 2 days. And so some of these are those success stories, and one's recent. But this is how these ALPRs are working to basically solve crime in our communities. With respect to stolen vehicle recoveries and arrests, these 2 up there are both San Carlos ALPRs. At one point, we had a stolen vehicle cross an ALPR, and we were able to locate the vehicle unoccupied, conducted surveillance on it, and when somebody came back, we arrested them, we recovered the vehicle. Another particular case, we had a stolen vehicle that was regularly crossing a San Carlos ALPR at a particular time of day every day. So we basically did a surveillance in that particular area, and sure enough, the car came by. We stopped the car, we arrested the person, and we seized the car. We had a situation where one of our neighboring jurisdictions had an armed robbery, and the victim was shot by the suspect in this armed robbery. The only description they had of the suspect vehicle was an SUV. So it was at a time of day where we were able to check our nearby ALPR, and we began to look for SUVs that happened to cross the ALPR. We got maybe 24 something SUVs, and we started screening those down until we eventually ended up with a suspect vehicle that led to that agency being able to solve this case and actually basically put the suspect at the crime scene because they crossed an ALPR pretty close to the crime scene. In another case that was recent, it helped solve a homicide. There was a homicide in the San Mateo County community. Several people were shot, 2 died. And the suspect vehicle's license plate was caught on a video camera. We took that license plate and plugged it into the investigators in the county, plugged it into an ALPR, and found out that license plate crossed the license plate reader in another jurisdiction across the bay. Investigating detectives knew that suspect in that case happened to have a close acquaintance that lived in that same city across the bay. And they took a chance and went to that person's house, and there was a car, and the case was solved. This murder case was solved within 24 hours. And there was 2 suspects, and both of them were custody almost immediately. And it can also lead into solving other crimes. There was a case where it was a mobile ALPR in another community detected on a stolen vehicle in a motel parking lot. And so they did surveillance. The guy came out. They arrested the suspect. They searched the suspect. They found a second set of keys in that suspect that were taken from a residential burglary the day before. It was a car taken from a residential burglary the day before. And so they were able to recover a second vehicle and solve a residential burglary. Those are just 5 of the 10 stories that I had from this one person. These ALPRs are so, in terms of their use and their effectiveness, it's almost too much to track. And it's really a game changer in law enforcement, in my opinion. I don't remember seeing a tool that's been this effective. Obviously, if you go back to fingerprinting and DNA is very effective. But this has been unbelievable. And it is more and more detectives are getting comfortable with using it. More and more patrol people are getting comfortable with using it. And it is solving more and more cases. So there's a couple things that came out with a recommendation, the one-year data retention. I can't remember any of our cases where it would have mattered, but when I talked to the executive director of the Fusion Center, he tells me there are cases where it mattered. But what I do know is, and what I have seen, is how effective they are in helping to solve crime and close crime. And sometimes, and I do know that sometimes crime, it's a little bit more than 6 months, and you can go back and solve a crime that was longer than 6 months ago. And during this particular time that we've had these ALPRs, we have an enormous number of incidents where they've been used to solve crime, and we have no reports of misuse. And we are basically, like I said, we're 50 out of the 50 agencies, we're one of 2 that has that short of a data retention period. So I would ask the council to consider extending that data retention period. So this will basically help with our ALPR program in this community. It will help us solve crimes when they occur. I do think that the bad guys get the word that we are wired up, and that can be a game changer as well. It certainly has in other communities. And that's my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Greg. Mr. Olbert.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Greg. Let me start off with one that I have to admit I was a little surprised to see. You mentioned that the data is not shared, no access is granted to ICE, and no data is shared with ICE. The thing I found interesting about that is, and I'm going to use an acronym that I don't know what it stands for, but NCRIC. NCRIC, I thought...
Northern California Regional Intelligence Center. I knew that one.
Oh, good. There we go. I'll try to remember that. My understanding is that's a federal-state partnership.
And federal, yes.
In other words, it's set up under
local,
some program.
Federal, state, and local partnerships.
So how can a branch of the federal government be, if they're a partner, be denied access to the data?
They can set the rules, and they'll say you can't have it because ICE is using it. If it's a criminal investigation, if any type of a criminal investigation, you can use the data. But if it's for ICE, strictly for their use, for issues related to deportation that have nothing to do with crime, then they can't use it, and they set the standard, and they can't do it.
Interesting. I'm just surprised that the feds let them do that. Other question I had is, let's see, where was it? I was a little surprised when this first came up because I know you and I have talked about the advantages of this as an investigatory tool, and to me they've proven themselves, like the examples that you were giving. Why was purchasing an additional license plate reader merged with the idea of changing the data retention period? Because the two don't seem to have anything to do with each other.
Well, I just felt they were related because we're talking about ALPR data retention and how long we want to keep. It's part of. To me, it's related because we're talking about LPRs and the data.
I'll grant you that the data comes from ALPRs and we're talking about retaining it. I guess, for me, I as you know, I don't have a problem with buying an additional 1 or 2 of them or whatever. I do have a problem with extending the period of time. Because in all candor, I understand the point that the head of the NCRIC was making to you, that he was aware of cases where the longer data retention does help solve things. But, as a practical matter, one could use that as an argument for retaining the data forever, because eventually, who knows, it may help. It's always a matter of striking balances and trade-offs. And my sense from our local experience, and maybe even from reading in between the lines a little bit about what he shared with you or she shared with you, is that it sounds like the rate at which the crimes are being solved is still fairly rapid. In other words, there are cases where after 6 months it would have been nice to have the data, but it doesn't sound like there's a large number of them.
I wouldn't know. I just know none of ours have taken that long. The most of ours have been pretty quick, pretty much right after. I just know that he says that there have been cases when it's in excess of 6 months, but I don't have much information beyond that.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Okay, Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Greg. Great presentation. I don't know if you can answer this. Are all the readers on poles, or some on cars?
We have some in cars, some on poles.
Okay. You can tell us where they are?
We talked about that last time. You guys said you weren't going to ask. You said.
You don't need to tell me. I'm just curious. I wanted to ask. So you mentioned ICE. Mark brought up an interesting question about that, but you said that the information is released if they have a warrant, what happens then? Do they then get the information?
If they have a warrant for...
In other words, if they say, well, we have a warrant to check the data.
I don't know that, that's something like that has ever happened. The NCRIC has a policy that they can't check the data. Also, you know, ICE understands the issue. They tend to want to play well with us. They don't want to force themselves on us. They understand what our situation is with respect to this issue, so they don't force it. And there's no concern that ICE is going to get that data from anybody that I spoke with.
Okay, good to know. And then the last thing was, the way you were describing it, it sounds like the whatever it is, the computer that gathers the data, does it automatically alert you if a license plate that you flagged, does it just pop up and say, does it give the location and the time and a picture of it?
It does. Our comm center, Redwood City has these as well as a lot of communities in the San Mateo County. Their dispatch center is set up so when that alert comes, they will get the alert in the dispatch center and they will vector a patrol deputy to that vehicle. We're not set up in our comm center to do that. So our hits are stale, but they're checked. But people go in and they check the hits a lot. Where are we getting? Where are these hits coming? What kind of car is it? What kind of vehicle is it? And they're able to use that information, like in one case, to see, you know what, this car keeps clicking across this ALPR every morning at 8:30 a.m. And they were able to go find that. So that's kind of how the system is used in that regard. But we don't currently vector in. We want to work with our comm center to be able to vector our deputies into hits. We had a situation where there was one of the vehicles, a suspect vehicle in a Redwood City case, crossed one of our LPRs. Redwood City was able to read that, and they vectored their deputy in, and this was a violent criminal. They didn't get the criminal, but they got his car. So...
I'm trying to remember my last question, but I'll let someone else answer.
Okay, well,
ask a question, and
we're
I'll
out of questions,
think
but you can always come back to it,
Yeah,
Mr. Collins. We'll always let you do that. I have a couple of speaker cards. First speaker is Beth Von Emster. If we'd keep it to about 2 minutes, that would be great. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Beth Von Emster. I'm with the local ACLU chapter, North Peninsula. We had the pleasure of working with Captain Rothis on the sheriff's policy. We agreed to disagree on this 6-month versus 12-month provision. The ACLU feels that as a matter of civil liberties, 6 months is a good number to stick with. Menlo Park has used this number successfully for a number of years. Menlo Park also, they issue a report annually and that they present to the City Council. And in their most recent report, they mentioned that they collected 443,000 camera images, and they didn't need to retain any beyond the 6 months. Obviously, if an image comes up and is useful in a criminal or civil case, it can be retained beyond the 6 months. Menlo Park, in its most recent reporting period, did not need to do that a single time out of 443,000 images. We feel that the same is going to be true for a similarly sized city of San Carlos. I'd like to talk briefly about ICE because it just came up in conversation. Those vigilant cameras have the ability to collect data and send it back to Vigilant. Now, Captain Rothis has given us a verbal assurance that that will not happen, that they are not interested in having that happen. But I would note that it's not a matter of written policy. So those switches could be flipped at any time, and then and Vigilant has a contract with ICE. So that is a matter of continuing concern.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
The other speaker I have is Kate Pfaff. Welcome. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. I stand tonight opposed to the use of automated license plate readers in the city of San Carlos. While such technology can indeed be useful as a law enforcement tool, it does so at the cost of mass surveillance of everyone in the city, the innocent along with the suspects. I object to having my movements tracked, my picture taken, my child's picture taken, every time we enter and exit the city we live in. I object to having data about my movements sold potentially by the vendor Vigilant, as they have done in other cities. And I object to the way Vigilant Solutions shares its license plate reader data with ICE in violation of our Welcoming City resolution passed this last year. And I thank the ACLU for their comments on Vigilant's history on that topic. The ALPRs not only record our license plate numbers, but they also take pictures of the cars, its occupants, passersby on the street, with a GPS location. That data could be used to create a profile of anyone's movements, including whether they attend a particular religious institution, a women's health clinic, or a political protest. This technology is a massive invasion of privacy without any just cause that would qualify for a warrant. According to the Electronic Frontier Foundation, access to ALPR technology has also been abused by police in other jurisdictions. Police in Birmingham and New York targeted the technology to track Muslims attending mosques. The Oakland PD was found to use it disproportionately against communities of color and in low-income areas. And an officer in D.C. collected the license plates of people visiting a gay bar and used the information for blackmail. The more data is collected and the longer it is stored, the greater the potential for abuse. I urge the city to not install any more ALPRs, as the city of Alameda has recently decided. And if you do, I urge you to keep or to lower the 6-month limit, not retaining any data on passing vehicles that do not match the hot list, and adopt a citizens' oversight ordinance to keep surveillance technology accountable the way that Santa Clara County and Berkeley City have done as well. Please protect the privacy of innocent citizens from the overreach of police surveillance. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on this matter? Please come up and maybe fill out a card afterwards, please. Appreciate it.
Hello, my name is Peter Williams. I'm a resident of San Carlos. I fully support extending the time to 12 months. I understand civil liberties concerns, but frankly, being on a public road with a public license plate issued by the state of California, that is public information. I don't see that that's coming anywhere near any constitutional issues whatsoever. So thank you very much for that.
All right, thank you for your comments, sir. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on this matter? Okay. Gentlemen, what would you like to do?
I have an additional question, Mr. Mayor.
Sure.
I'm not sure if this is for Greg or which Greg it's for, so I'll just throw it out there. I'd like staff to educate me a little bit more on the relationship between San Carlos Vigilant, this organization, and NCRIC, because I guess I was under the perhaps false assumption that our cameras fed data directly to NCRIC, and it sounds like they go through Vigilant instead, and I want to understand how that works.
Vigilant has access to the system. They have access to the data. The data is stored by the NCRIC.
But the data passes through Vigilant on its way to NCRIC?
My understanding is yes.
Okay, so theoretically, it's subject to any kind of man-in-the-middle kind of situation. Meaning that, what are the contractual provisions that bind Vigilant to not take the data and do whatever they feel like with it?
We do have a contract agreement with them as it relates to data management and what they can and cannot do with respect to the data. And one of those is the provisions is we set who gets to see the data, not Vigilant. And we set our system up in that manner. And they have no right or authority to do that. Is it possible that by some nefarious way somebody could violate that contract and put that corporation in upside down by violating the trust and confidence of a law enforcement agency and do it anyway? Probably, I guess. But this is a contract arrangement, and it is critical to their business model that they honor that.
What are the provisions in the contract if they were to be found to have either accidentally or deliberately violated the provisions of the contract?
If they did it on purpose, they could probably be prosecuted for criminal violation by misusing data. like we could, like the law enforcement could, depending upon the nature of the circumstances. If a law enforcement officer misuses data, for example, in the manner that was described earlier, he's subject to prosecution and should be. And my sense is that would be the same with the employee, and also they would face internal consequences for their job.
Mr. Rubens, would you weigh in on that last part? This is an area of law that I'm not terribly familiar with. I understand what Greg Rothhaus was saying about the misuse of or misactivities of law enforcement personnel. I know about the statutory provisions, but I don't understand what happens when you inject a private company into that mix.
Well, it's a private company that is a contract under contract with a public agency, so I think that might be a distinction that would not give them the protection that maybe there's some concern about. I'm looking at it a little differently, and I'm trying to be hypothetical here, not specific to any particular incident, but. The way I look at it is, if there were a claim by a member of the public against the program, which would involve government agencies, the government agencies, and then there was a lawsuit that came out, the government agencies would have indemnity under the agreement, and the vendor would be responsible to indemnify and hold harmless and defend the cities, which is a huge penalty for them under the contract, because any liability, any civil rights liability, any kind of liability arising out of any misuse of the technology or the data would expose them to all the damages of the cities.
Okay, fair enough. I guess I understand that, and I guess I'm seeing an example of that sort of play out as Facebook has lost over $100 billion worth of value because somebody misused data that they got from Facebook, but that didn't keep the data from being misused. That's just the nature of the contractual environment. It doesn't sound to me like, stop me if I'm wrong, it doesn't sound to me like in your hypothetical that that the state could undertake a criminal prosecution saying you've misused public information, and not only are you going to be, your company going to get fined out of existence, but several of you are going to spend the rest of your life in jail.
I think the individuals who did it could certainly be exposed to criminal liability, and I think it's misuse of the information could be considered. I mean, there could be a discriminatory purpose. There could be all kinds of reasons. There could be they use it, the data in a separate crime, which would expose them in two different ways for misuse of the data. So I think there definitely is a criminal exposure for someone who did that.
Okay, thank you for explaining that.
Hey, Mr. Collins, your final question?
Yep, that was the question I forgot. Greg, I thought I read in here, and I couldn't find it when I went back to it, is that there seems to be sort of a law of diminishing returns when data is collected or is kept beyond a year. Did I misread that? I mean, I saw that where it's kept up to a year, but.
Yeah, that's the standard that people keep it up to is a year. And that's the standard bid in this county because of the trade-off. And we all agree that there's a trade-off. And Councilmember Olbert said, I think it was, why not keep it forever? I mean, we could theoretically do that. So where is that trade-off? And the sense from law enforcement experience is, looking at the civil liberties interests, the legitimate civil liberties concerns of many, also looking at criminal work, criminal investigations, and how long they can take sometimes, that a year would be a time frame that struck the balance. I would say, though, too, that sometimes it's really difficult to figure out whether or not a year would have made a difference, like say in the example of Menlo Park, whether it would have made a difference or not, because by definition, the data is gone. Right. So how would you know whether or not it would make a difference because it wasn't there to check? So it's kind of hard to prove that piece of it. So anyways, the year is a number that law enforcement feels that strikes the balance.
When we visited this issue before, I seem to remember when they were talking about these cameras that they were taking pictures of the license plate.
Correct.
And there was a comment that they take pictures of the car and the occupants and surrounding area. What is the case?
I've seen a lot of pictures from ALPRs. I've never been able to distinguish any distinguishing characteristic of a person inside of a vehicle that I remember. I've never looked at it that way. I don't know anybody that has. I've never had anybody come to me, oh yeah, you can make it out. It looks like it's the guy. You know, we've used them here in this community. We've used them to solve cases. I've looked at them. I can remember even seeing a person inside the car. I remember seeing the car, and then this idea that somehow you're going to be able to distinguish who that person is based on all the photography that I've seen from them, I think that would be next to impossible. They're basically designed to take rear plates, so you're taking the picture from the back of the car.
So, but having the plate pretty much allows you to get whatever information you need, right?
Sure.
I mean, if somebody says it's an SUV, if it's a Ford SUV, and you see the plate and it matches up with a few, well, actually it would match up with one Ford SUV, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, so gentlemen, what do we want to do here?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt Resolution 2018-38.
38. Yes.
38, a resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement to purchase and install automatic license plate readers at one intersection from Vigilant Technologies in the amount of $118,172.18, increasing the appropriations budget in the amount of $125,000 and changing the ALPR data retention period from 6 months to 1 year.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
All right, discussion, Mr. Collins?
Yes, thank you. This is the, third or fourth time we've visited this issue. Anybody who maybe didn't follow previous meetings, initially I was one of those people that had safety concerns, privacy concerns, and I voted against it. And that was whenever we started doing this a couple of years ago. Subsequent to that, I took a trip up to the NCRIC Center up in San Francisco and got a tour of the facility. And I asked if I could go and see where that the data was stored. And they said, sorry, you don't have a high enough level of clearance. And I said, well, what about Chief Rothfuss? And they said, he doesn't have that level of clearance either. And so I asked another guy, and they said, he doesn't have it either. So there's a very limited number of people that actually have the access to the data. I was also one of those that decided that we should keep the data only for 6 months. It's now been a couple of years. I've seen enough of this program now to know that I don't have any, not only do I not have any reasonable expectation that that I have privacy out on the streets, I also know, and by my own experience and law enforcement I've talked to, that I haven't seen any cases of abuse at the local level. I realize that there may be some nationally, but at some point you have to trust your law enforcement to do the right thing, and I do in this case, and so I do support the motion and also extending it to a year.
All right, thank you. Mr. Olbert?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As people may imagine, I have a somewhat different perspective. I actually would be fine voting to acquire an additional reader because I do believe that they have proven themselves as an investigatory tool. And the way, in fact, in which they're set up, they, to my knowledge, they're not able to be used to track people because they're just not enough of them, frankly. I'd have a different feeling if we were talking about buying 1,000 of them or 100 of them, scattering them around town. I am, however, troubled by the idea of extending the data retention period. Frankly, we do try to make our decisions as best we can based on data analytics, particularly when we're talking about spending money. And with all due respect to Sheriff Rothfuss, really there isn't any analytics here for extending it from 6 months to 12 months. We heard about a couple of situations where cases were broken later. I understand that. It's always a matter of trade-off. But Menlo Park obviously gets by without this big time. We've never had an experience with it, and with it being a problem. And as I mentioned to the chief when he was the chief a few years ago when we first brought this up, if there really was a concern about needing the extra 6 months, the discussion I'd rather have is what kind of additional resources do I need to get you to do investigations faster? Because I'd like to get the investigation started faster. Because remember, once an investigation is started and there seems to be some reason to retain license plate reader data, that's a totally different ballgame. That's not governed by the 6 months or the 12 months. That's just governed by however long the investigation is. So I'm going to be voting against this resolution. I support the idea of having the readers and of acquiring another one, but I don't see grounds for extending the data retention period from 6 months to 12 months.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Mr. Grocott?
So the concerns I have is, while someone may be prosecuted if data is misused, once it's misused, the damage has been done. You know, it's like you rob somebody's house and steal a bunch of their things, and those things are gone. You might catch the thief and not find the things he or she stole. That person is out those items. Maybe it's a heirloom diamond ring or something. It's not coming back. So my point is, when a crime is committed, even though someone may be prosecuted and serve time, it doesn't necessarily make whole the person who was violated. And so I'm not happy with that as an explanation for why this should be okay. I really appreciated the comments that this lady made. I would echo everything you said. I agree with it completely. We have a Fourth Amendment to our Constitution that gives us these civil liberties. It says, you know, in our homes, our papers, our personal effects, we have privacy. And to this gentleman's comments, just because I take my vehicle, which I own and pay taxes on and so forth, and I register it with the state to stay compliant with the law. But just because I take my vehicle on a public roadway doesn't mean I'm giving up my civil liberties. So I don't agree with the idea that just because I go out onto a public roadway that I'm open to surveillance by the government. And I would make this point also. We're a republic, and what that means is the people own the government, of the people, by the for the people, and so forth. So to have, if anywhere we should have our civil liberties respected, it's in the public domain, out on the street. Now you pull into a parking lot of a business, and if they have a camera, you're on their property. You lose some of your civil liberties by going on someone else's property. So you go to the store, that's somebody else's property. If they want to have a camera, if the police want to use that data or that information to solve a crime, they do it. I know they do it, and that's fine. All the examples that were given about solving crimes, my understanding of the way the stories were told, it was done pretty quickly. I could see if this is going to be done, if we're going to have these cameras, keep the data for a month. Because if somebody's a suspect and you're going to get information off those cameras about their vehicle and traveling here and there, once they're a suspect, then you can grab the data and keep it for as long as you please, because you have an open investigation into a crime. But everybody else should be able to just, you know, pass on through without having their data kept, if we're going to have cameras and if we're going to keep data at all. So, especially with this motion where we're extending it to a year, I have never, every time this has come before the council, I've opposed it on principle, and I'm opposed to it tonight even more, not because we're just adding to the cameras that we already have, but because we're extending that time period by 6 months, and I don't see the need for it at all. I agree with Mr. Olbert on that one. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I respectfully disagree with my colleagues. I'll just say a couple words in support of the motion. You know, it's been common practice for law enforcement for, I think, over 40 years now that anytime a police officer pulls someone over or sees something suspicious, the first thing they do is they look at the license plate number, they call it back to dispatch, somebody looks it up in a database, and it gives that officer information about what that vehicle is. This is just making that process automated. It's something that we have all accepted, and the reason we accept it is because it helps solve crimes and it helps keep us safe. We can, you know, construct a lot of what if this and what if this happens and what if this person gets access to this data and what if this happens. But, you know, we don't really have a lot of examples of that. And what we do have examples of is people solving murders and people solving burglaries and people solving recovering, stolen property. And for me, as a representative of the community, when somebody has their house broken into, I want to make sure that we have every tool available to be able to solve that crime and to get that person off the street so they're not going to break into somebody else's house. So I think this has been an exceptionally effective program. I know people personally who've had their stolen cars recovered because of an ALPR, and I can maybe track some of the what-if scenarios, but in my personal opinion, it's very, very benign and not something that people should be concerned about.
All right, thank you for your comments. As I remember, and Crystal can correct me, but as I remember, I think I voted for this last time, but it was defeated 3-2. As Mr. Collins said, I think he was the swing vote. But I'm going to be supporting this resolution because, again, with comments that Mr. Collins and Mr. Johnson made, I believe it's a tool that has not been abused and I think can be more of a benefit than a detriment. So, seeing no other comments, call the roll, please.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
No.
And Mayor Vasily?
Yes. All right, moving on. Item 11B, consideration of adopting a resolution approving the plans and specifications for the traffic signal at Alameda de las Pulgas and Eaton Avenue project C9818, authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement with Redgwick Construction Company of Oakland in the amount of $510,612.50, appropriating $161,000 from the General Capital Fund 25 unassigned fund balance to the project budget C9818, and authorizing the expenditure of a construction budget with contingencies in the amount of $596,000. Ms. Peterson.
Good evening, Council. My name is Tara Peterson, Interim Public Works Director. Before you this evening is the traffic signal at Alameda de las Pulgas and Eaton. Before we get started into the presentation, I wanted to note that in the resolution, we did not mention that a notice of exemption had been filed back in October, and that was an oversight that should have been included in the resolution. So we have a couple of options. We can have council advise staff to add it under the record, or we can have return it to council on the consent calendar with that added into the resolution. So you can decide that as we make the presentation. I'll start by introducing Grace Lee, our city engineer, and she will then update you with a couple things that have occurred and also introduce the consultant that we have this evening. Thank you.
Welcome, Grace.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Grace Lee, city engineer. The Eaton Alameda traffic signal project was added to the capital improvement program as part of the fiscal year 2016-2017 budget approval process. Contract bids were opened on February 22nd, 2018, and before you tonight is recommendation to approve the construction contract. A community meeting was held on March 22nd, 2018. It was well attended. There were about 15 to 20 residents expressing their views and asking questions. Tonight we have Joy Bhattacharya, our consultant, that would explain the traffic study that was done for the signal. Joy was previously with Stantec Consultant and is now currently with Advanced Mobility Group. Joy has over 25 years of traffic engineering experience and have designed over 200 traffic signals. He is also on the board of the Institute of Transportation Engineers and teaches at the UC Berkeley Extension Program, as well as the Master's Program at San Jose State. And with that, I'll turn it over to Joy.
Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. I'm Joy Bhattacharya. I guess I don't need to introduce myself. Thank you, Grace. With that, I'll go on with the presentation. It's about the study that we had conducted for Alameda de las Pulgas and Eaton Avenue. But before we go into the study findings, I wanted to just share with you some of the backgrounds. for the project. So UC Berkeley Tech Transfer Program actually conducted a review of all the intersections in the city of San Carlos and identified that this intersection, Eaton and Alameda de la Pulgas, should be considered for a traffic signal based on their safety evaluation, and it should also be like coordinated with the adjacent signal to the south, which is Edgewood Road, and it is like around 600 feet away from each other. And this improvement, the city put it into the capital improvement program for funding this improvement. Then in 2016, some additional study was conducted, and that is when we came in and started conducting the study. And we'll talk about all the evaluation that we had done as part of that study. Once the study recommended that a signal should be installed or installed at that intersection and coordinated with the adjacent signal, we moved forward with the design of the signal, and it was advertised for bid, and bid opened on February 22nd. And before going into our analysis, we just wanted to bring forward a couple of items. One is the difference between a traffic regulation versus traffic calming. Now, traffic regulation is the control of movements of both vehicles as well as pedestrian in order to improve safety and mobility at intersections. And when we are talking about traffic regulation, it needs to follow some of the standards that are laid down by the federal government as well as the state. And those are included in the Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices standards. And one of the standards for implementing a signal is to be able to meet the warrants for a signal. So the warrants basically identifies the threshold when a signal can be installed at an intersection. And since it is a regulation, the public opinion or public input is not a major consideration, which in case of traffic calming becomes a major consideration, because traffic calming is a way where you are basically trying to improve and make the drivers more responsible drivers by adding features like speed humps or narrowing the roads such that people need to slow down, or the traffic volume is too high and it needs to be brought down. So in that kind of a situation, the city establishes the threshold, and City of San Carlos recently adopted the Neighborhood Traffic Management Plan, which kind of lays down as to what kind of traffic calming measures should be implemented given the different situations. The other thing I wanted to bring up is the roadway classification, where all the roadways are classified into like 3 major categories, which are the arterial street, the collector streets, and the local street. And as you can see on the right-hand side, the figure on the right-hand side, it basically shows that the purpose of the arterial street is to increase mobility. That means such that the cars can go from one point to other as quickly as they need to. And that would fall, like the freeways and the arterials fall under that category. The next category is the collector street, which is transferring cars from local generators to the arterials. So the arterials are connecting it to the freeway. The collectors are connecting it to the arterials, and then comes the local street, which provides access to the local generators, which could be the residential or industrial or commercial sites. Now, one of the things that we also need to understand is that the Alameda de la Pulgas is classified as an arterial street under the San Carlos General Plan, and Eaton Avenue is classified as a collector street. And under the Caltrans, Caltrans also has a functional classification that they maintain for all the roadways within the state, and Alameda de la Pulgas is also classified as an arterial street. And most of the fundings from the state as well as the federal highway become available to the arterial street and the collector streets, and the local streets are only funded by local money. With that as the background, I just wanted to get into the analysis or the technical details that we went through. So this was started in 2016 when we started looking at the traffic signal warrant analysis, which I'll go through very quickly. And then we also did the intersection control evaluation, which is one of the necessary steps to figure out what kind of control should be implemented at that intersection. And we looked at the existing condition, which is a stop control. We looked at the signalized option, and also the option for installing a roundabout at that intersection. And we identified some of the design constraints, which we took care of as part of the design for the intersection, and also did the cost estimate. So this is what the signal warrant study does. It's basically established a threshold for normal condition, which just means that during normal condition, based on the traffic volume, as well as the pedestrian characteristics and the physical characteristics of the roadway, whether the thresholds are met at that intersection. And what it does is it compares the existing operation condition and the safety conditions to the proposed with the control measure and compares the two, trying to figure out if there would be a potential for improvement at these intersections. So that is how we did the warrant analysis. There are a total of 9 warrants that are listed as part of the warrant analysis. And we found that it has met the first 3 warrants, which are the 8-hour volume warrants, which basically means the highest 8 hours are above the threshold. For that intersection, it also met the 4-hour vehicle volume warrant and the peak hour volume warrant. We also analyzed the crash experience or the crash warrant, which was not met. And the others we did not delve into because it needs additional data collection and it would not be applicable for this intersection.
Could you go back?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
So this is a summary of the evaluation results. And as you can see, we basically analyzed both the intersections, which is Alameda de la Pulgas and Eaton intersection, as well as Edgewood. Edgewood is already signalized, and what we did is we compared the condition based on the existing, which is a stop control for Alameda and Eaton. We looked at the numbers with coordinated signals between the 2 intersections and a roundabout. And what we see here is the second column talks about the delay at the intersections. And as we see, currently the delay is over 50 seconds per vehicle, which is considered to be a level of service F, which means that it is over capacity at that intersection. However, when we do a coordinated signal at that intersection, it brings it down to level of service B. And the level of service is just a measure of how the traffic is operating at that intersection, with level of service A being free flow, no delay, and level of service F means it's a jammed condition where there is extensive delay. And with signalization, it gets to a level of service B, and with a roundabout, it goes to a level of service D with around 26 seconds per vehicle delay. And the one below, which shows the intersection operation for Edgewood intersection, as we can see that with a roundabout and the existing condition, it does not get impacted. It only gets impacted when the 2 signals are coordinated, where the delay goes down from F to a level of service D. Design and cost, we looked at the design aspects for a roundabout as well as a signal. The signal did not require any right-of-way acquisition. However, the roundabout, just to fit it into that intersection, which is not that large, it would require some right-of-way acquisition, and the traffic signal cost would be lower than the cost for a roundabout. This is the design that was created for this intersection. One or two of the key features out here is that all of the ramps have access ramps or ADA ramps. So that is an improvement at the intersection. We are adding 1 crosswalk on the south side of the roadway, or Alameda de la Pulgas on the south side. There is currently no crosswalk, but that will get added as part of the project. And we are also including a bulb out on the southwest corner. And the effectiveness of the bulb out is that it allows people to cross a shorter distance at the intersection, thereby reducing the conflict between the pedestrians and the vehicles. So overall, just to summarize the advantages of the traffic signal at this particular location, it is the additional crosswalk and the access ramps. It is the shortened pedestrian crossing distance due to the bulb out. It will, since it is being signalized, so it will have a dedicated pedestrian phase associated with the vehicular phases, which will reduce the conflicts between vehicle and pedestrian, increase pedestrian safety at night because of the mast arm indicating the stop at the intersection. It improves the overall level of service from level of service F to B, and it definitely increases the capacity of handling traffic at the intersection. and it would provide longer gaps between the platoons for the side streets or from the driveways to come out into the roadway.
What does that mean, longer gaps between platoons? Could you put that in English, please?
Sure. It basically means that there will be more adequate gaps between two cars where people coming out from the side street can actually merge and come on to Alameda de la Pulgas.
I don't understand. What is, I'm sorry, I'll wait till my question. Go ahead, finish.
And also the emergency vehicle preemption, which will allow reducing the response time for the emergency vehicles. We also considered few other options. The one that I shared today is the roundabout, which was not recommended because of the right-of-way take. And there are other two options which came up, which is the flashing during the off-peak, which is not recommended because it would add some driver's confusion from getting into a stop control to a signalized and back to stop control. And then flashing at night, which is a possibility, and we are currently looking at the always stop control at St. Francis, which keeps the stop control, just shifts it over to St. Francis Way and signalizes the intersection at Eaton for better operation. With that, I have a couple of videos which I could share, and if not, we can get into the questions.
Why don't we get into questions? Mr. Johnson?
Thank you for the presentation. So this is a question maybe for staff or maybe for our consultant. It's sort of a simple question, and maybe somebody can give me a sort of a simple answer, which is, what is the problem we're trying to solve? Who is currently facing that problem, and how does a stoplight fix that problem?
Maybe you can join in, but the problem that we are saying is what we explained in the level of service, which is a level of service F, which basically means there is extensive delay at the intersection, and to reduce that delay and make the operation better along Alameda de la Pulgas, and also to improve the safety at that location.
And that is all day, every day, or in the mornings, in the evenings, for people going in a particular direction?
It's a commuter route, so it basically is during the AM peak and the PM peak period, which is typically between 7 and 9 in the morning is considered to be the AM peak, and between 4 and 6 in the evening is considered to be the PM peak. So that is the time period when congestion or overcapacity happens at this intersection. However, we also looked at the 8 hours traffic signal warrant, which was above the threshold, which means that it is not just during the peak period, but it actually meets the threshold for 8 hours of a day.
And so these are San Carlos residents who are trying to get where? Where are they trying to go? Is they're trying to get to 280, or they're trying to get to Redwood City, or both, or? So, I mean, I'm just trying, or is it people who are commuting into the city, or all of the above? Like, what is the population of people that are facing this traffic concern?
So it's all of the above. And since it's an arterial, it's basically connecting the freeways together. So there will be freeway to freeway connection as well. Being very close to Redwood City, there would be a lot of Redwood City residents using this corridor as well. Sure. But we also need to note that Alameda de la Pulgas is one of the main north-south street, and there isn't enough north-south street going through San Carlos, so it provides a lot of connection for the San Carlos residents as well.
And so, okay, so these people are transiting through this intersection that today has stop signs, and how does a traffic light significantly improve the experience?
So currently they are over capacity, so the delay at that intersection for each driver could be like minute or more that they have to spend or basically get stuck in traffic for over a minute. That will come down to approximately the 16 seconds, and it's not exactly going to be the same, but the order of magnitude is going to be that they have to stop for a lesser period of time or experience lesser delay going through that intersection. So the overall travel time is going to get better.
Okay, so on average, if you commute through that intersection, you will get an average of 45 seconds of savings in your commute?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a bunch of questions, but one thing that popped up at the end, and I'm going to talk about that first. You mentioned consider an always stop control at St. Francis and Alameda. Is that in place of, in addition to?
We were considering in addition to.
In addition to. Would it be an arterial or would it be a regular traffic signal?
Currently, what we have been asked to look at is stop control. So that's a three-way stop.
Just a three-way stop. Okay, great. Now I'll go back to my other questions. Just for point of reference, how often do you do these studies?
We do a lot of these studies, which could be a traffic calming kind of a study, which could be part of a traffic impact study, which could be part of a separate study that just looks at the intersection controls. And I've been doing this for around 25 years. And typically, we do maybe I manage around 50 studies a year. So 50, yeah. So it's maybe
50 times 25.
1,000 plus.
And a couple. Is there anything different or unusual about this particular intersection than others that you've studied?
The process is the same that we need to go through, which is the ICE process, is the intersection control evaluation process. And each and every location is very unique. But what I think at this intersection, it makes it a little bit more unique because there is a lot of frontage to residential properties from an arterial street, and which is typically not the case at most of the locations that we go through.
Can you think of one other that sort of comes to mind that was kind of like this, that traffic light was recommended and it was installed, and what were the results?
One of the projects that we recently did was for the city of Lafayette along Pleasant Hill Road and Olympic Boulevard, and it goes through a lot of residential community out there. And we basically recommended one roundabout at Pleasant Hill and Olympic Boulevard, and then we recommended 2 additional signals along the corridor. And initially, the project took a long period of time before it went into design, and then currently it was implemented. And I still keep getting cards from the residents there saying that how much they appreciate having the signal at that location because it has improved their safety as well as the overall operation through the corridor.
I'm sorry you didn't recommend a roundabout. I really like roundabouts. So. Sorry, editorial comment.
Just take your time. We have all the time in the world.
Oh, sorry. I know we have a lot of speakers, but
we do have a lot of speakers.
I want to actually some of my questions, many of my questions are the result of emails I got and some phone calls and the meeting I went to last Thursday. So I thank those people. If you hear something that you thought of, it's because I heard you, and that's why I'm asking the question. How many cars a day go through that intersection? According to your study, I'm sorry, I just don't remember. I didn't see it in the study.
I just have to look that up in the study. You're asking about in all directions?
Yeah.
Okay. So that will be 400. So during the AM peak, it is around 1,000 cars. So
1,000? Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. Mr. Mayor, I'm just going to ask one more question for now, and then I'd like to come back maybe later.
Go ahead.
All right. So it was mentioned that green lights encourage more speed. Have you found that to be the case? When, in other words, people are coming up to a green light and it turns yellow, is that a common occurrence? I mean, people gun it to get through the intersection?
I wouldn't say it's a common occurrence, but there are people who do so. And it's more of the driver's behavior than anything else. So if the driver's behavior is to go through the yellow as fast as they can, like legally we are not supposed to change our speed when we see a yellow light. And we are supposed to continue driving at the same speed, and it could be that you have to stop or pass through the intersection depending on where you are. So legally we are not supposed to, but some people do. And the same people would also maybe drive faster between the stop signs to make up for the time that they have lost at the stop intersection.
All right. I'm going to pause because I want to give my colleagues a chance to chime in.
Mr. Olbert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. See a lot of familiar faces out here tonight. Ron and I were in the back of the room last week when sort of a dry run of this presentation went through for the neighborhood. So good to see you guys here. I've always had a question about warrants, something I don't understand. If the traffic in an area like here meets a warrant, are you required to do something? Or is it just that you're allowed to do something without exposing yourself to financial liability?
So the other way around is true, that you're not supposed to install a signal if it doesn't meet the warrant. Right. But if it meets the warrant, then it is advised or recommended to install a signal unless there is some other reason that it's going to make it unsafe or make it worse.
So so the law doesn't, the vehicular code doesn't say if you meet the warrants you have to do something, whether it's a light or whatever. Okay. You can basically choose to live with a lousy service level, essentially. Speaking of that, what's the I saw the data you presented about what the ranking from the study was of the service level in the area. Do we have any information on the trend of that? In other words, has it been getting worse over, I mean, I don't know when the last time we studied it was, but that's my question. Has it been getting worse?
The initial study was back in 2014, 2013. At that time, it was recommended to put a signal to have a further study. So now, fast forward to 2016, we did the warrant study, and it still warrants a traffic signal.
Do you remember the rating level from the early? I know the current one is rated F, right? So was it rated F back then as well?
It doesn't say in this study, but it would have, I'm suspecting it would have, because our City of San Carlos general plan says that our intersection level of service should be at least D, mid-level D. So it would have been less than mid-level D at that point.
What's expert opinion on if we don't put a light in here or don't do something else other than what we currently have, what's likely to happen? I don't think they have a level below F, right? I mean, F is as low as you could go.
I don't believe there's a level below F. You just have a failed intersection.
More and more traffic tied up.
A longer delay. Delay would keep adding on, but your intersection level is at F.
Okay. In fact, you walked us through, Grace, not too long ago, the traffic calming protocol.
Yeah, the neighborhood traffic management plan program.
So I apologize for not remembering the details of it enough to have to ask this next question, but is this situation with Eaton and Alameda such that could we do something like the following? Approve the light, perhaps with some tweaks on it, but require as part of that we engage in a study to look at what kinds of traffic calming measures could be done on Eaton. I'm thinking specifically of Eaton because, frankly, from the comments I heard on the weeknight meeting that you guys ran, there's a lot of concerns, but one big chunk of the concern is what's going to happen to the traffic on Eaton. So I'd like to see, can we use the policy that way to say, okay, we'll do the light, but we're going to do some other stuff too?
Definitely, but we would want to make sure that the light gets installed first, or else we'd be studying a condition that can change right after. So we'd want to install the light. We might come up with the wrong calming measures if we didn't put the light in first. Right, okay. Because once we put the light in, it might change some dynamics.
Okay. Just two more questions. I saw that you recommend not switching back to flashing outside of rush hours, which I have to admit was my idea, but I understand why you say that. That's, it would confuse drivers. But is there a way is the system smart enough so that we can adjust the timing of it at different times of day to prioritize traffic along the Alameda direction and not Eaton? Because another thing that I thought I heard in that weeknight neighborhood meeting was, frankly, an understandable concern that people are like, we don't want Eaton to become the next major east-west cross-connect between El Camino and Alameda. And so if we were to, deprioritize the light at Eaton, that would make it less desirable for people to drive that way.
I'll start it off, but I'll hand it over to Joy because he's an expert in signal timing. But because we have a signal, we get more flexibility in setting the timing at different times of day.
Okay.
So definitely we can customize that and coordinate it with the Edgewood signal.
Okay.
And typically, that's what is done in most of the signals. It has like during the morning peak and the evening peak, it runs a different kind of timing patterns. And during the off peak, it basically runs free. So depending on which direction the cars are coming in, it tends to provide that direction the green light.
Okay.
So there's no fixed timing plan that is used for the off peak period.
I see. Because I'm just speculating off the top of my head. My sense is that if the light were to go in, probably one of the things the neighborhood would not like to see is to make it really convenient to travel on Eaton to get to Alameda. They'd rather see it prioritized the other way, provided that it still provides capability for them themselves to get out onto Alameda.
Yes.
Okay, last question. And it just came by this on one of your slides as I was walking back in from having had to step out before. You indicated that you, as a result of the meeting last week, you're now looking at something at St. Francis. So what was that about?
So we were just given the assignment to look at whether the stop sign warrants meet at the St. Francis intersection.
Oh, the stop sign warrants.
The stop sign warrant. So it would be a three-way stop. So one of the concerns that we heard was that if the stop is removed and it's only green light, people might be going through without slowing down. So having another stop at that intersection, if it is warranted, may help in that situation.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Grocott?
Just one question. You said that the signal would be coordinated with the signal at Edgewood. My question is, for traffic, in which direction?
So the coordination works in both directions, depending on the time period. So typically,
Explain what you mean by both directions.
So the coordination, what it means is if somebody is going north and once he crosses one of the intersection, the chances of him getting green at the next intersection is very high because that is how the offset between the intersection is created, such that it turns green right when the cars are arriving at the second intersection. And it is done for the major direction. So whichever one is has the most congested direction, that direction gets the coordination. And if the direction changes during the reverse commute time, then the coordination will be for the other direction.
So, follow-up question. Currently, when one is coming down Edgewood, traveling eastbound, and makes a left turn onto the Alameda, already there's, at certain times of day, backup. I've been at that intersection sitting on Edgewood and cannot go anywhere when the light turns green because of the traffic. The queue of cars that are backed up between Edgewood and Eaton is so great that you can't even get into the intersection, never mind the light turned green for you. So are you coordinating with that? Or are you only coordinating north-south, south to north?
So I had exactly the same video. So you're talking about people coming on eastbound on Edgewood and trying to make a left northbound going up towards Eaton. Yes. So that happens. And during our field observation, we noted exactly the same thing. And what we are doing, and the reason for that to happen is because in the northbound direction, everybody has to stop. And that is how the queue is building up and coming up almost to Edgewood or basically beyond Edgewood in certain situations. And that's the reason the left turners are unable to get into ADLB. Now, with coordination, what will happen is there won't be too many leftover cars on Eaton. So everyone will be served as part of the green time for the northbound movement, which will clear up the space between Eaton and Edgewood, which will allow the left turners to be able to make the left and go to the next intersection at Eaton. So it will help clearing out the space between the two intersections. And that is what the coordination is going to achieve.
I hear you. I don't believe you, but okay, thank you.
So I got a few questions. At one point, someone told me that Redwood City is going to kick in some money for this, and the number is?
$200,000.
So we're allowing 596. Is that 200 added to that, or is that subtracted? So net it's 396 for us.
Yeah. So the number that you have at on the staff report is the overall need for the project. It doesn't account for the 200 from. So Redwood City will reimburse the city.
So it's 396 really. That's the 596. Trust me, the 596 is the number.
Sure.
Trust me on that. Okay. So that means it's going to be 396. Okay, great. All right. What's the class? You gave us Eaton. You gave us Alameda. What's Edgewood? The class? Arterial, freeway. What is it?
What's that again? Sorry. Edgewood is a collector street.
A collector, not an arterial.
No.
A collector? That Edgewood?
Edgewood is in Redwood City. I think it's a
Oh, I know
collector street.
No, it comes all the way down from the top, from 280. You're telling me that long thing is a collector, not an arterial? Okay. One of you want to take a chance, or you don't know? So you can say you don't know. It's okay. What is it? Or you don't know?
I really don't know. We
Okay,
did not
fine.
study
You don't know.
Redwood City,
That's fine.
so yes.
You don't know. That's great. I don't know a lot of things either, so that's great. Okay. I don't know. It seemed like that'd be pretty obvious to know. But anyway, isn't it? But really, I've driven that thing. I know Matt has a lot, but I drive that section a lot. And there's traffic certain hours. And I get that, and I don't go around there during school hours, needless to say. But at 5 o'clock, I've done it a number of times, and it backs up. And I've been there. And this morning, I went down at 10:30, and you could have shot a cannon off, and you wouldn't have hit a car. Okay, I honestly, it's going to be convincing or hard to convince me to say that 8 hours is going to. I mean, I don't know where you got the 8 hours. I guess you just keep adding them up. But anyway, but you did the traffic thing on that. You mentioned about Warren number 6. Isn't it a signal? You talked about a signalization. Isn't it a signalization with the Edgewood Alameda one? You said number 6. It's a coordinated signal system. Isn't that a coordinated signal system with Edgewood and Alameda?
So the warrant, the way it is put in is that if there are two signals which is really far off,
yes,
that cannot be coordinated together,
yes,
then it can be warranted to have another signal in between such that they can be coordinated.
Okay,
so,
whatever
and
that is.
that's
Okay.
not the situation
All right. But really what we're doing here is we're trying to solve a traffic issue that's on Alameda. Have we decided that it's worse north or south?
It's in both directions.
Both. So we're considering that it's equal, that north and south on Alameda is just bad. Okay, all right. Are the signals, Grace, when we put the signals in, are they going to have like 24, 23, 22, 21, 20 numbers for us old people who can't run?
I don't believe that's currently in the. Is it?
Talking about pedestrians? Or?
Yeah,
pedestrians. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that's the standard for new signals that
So
they
on all
do
sides.
have the countdown.
Countdown. Okay, good.
Pedestrian.
All right. When you mention flashing at night, when you say at night, what's night? When does night come?
So that hasn't been defined yet, but if that is the direction that we go, typically it's around 8 p.m. At night that it goes into flashing and stays till early morning.
Okay, because years ago, I haven't done the El Camino in a long, long time, but years ago, the El Camino had flashing lights all and up and down after a certain, of course, it was pretty much early in the morning those days, but anyway, that was another story. Okay, well, those are mine. Mr. Johnson and then Mr. Collins.
Question for Grace. So, I know traffic is a big priority. I know we're focused on the Holly corridor and focused on Four Corners around Carlmont, Tierra Linda. Where does this intersection, where does this rank relative to the priorities of intersections that we would want to spend money to improve? Can you give us a sense of that? Is this the third worst, the 10th worst? How do you think about it?
Among the ones that we've studied, this is one of the worst. We have forthcoming in the budget cycle, we have an ask to look at major intersections. So we might find more as we look at the different major intersections. It's just that these studies are are costly, so we haven't done a whole lot of them if it's not tied to something like a Holly 101 or like San Carlos pedestrian safety. So if it doesn't tie to other plans, we haven't looked at just intersections, but we're going to have a study coming forward in the budget cycle to look at major intersections. So this is one that we've seen is level service F, which is the worst service level you can have. So this is one that needs attention.
Are you aware of other intersections that have the same rating in the city?
Service level F. I know of intersections in other cities of service level F, but there are other intersections like Phelp intersection met the signal warrant when we're looking at the San Carlos corridor. So that's one traffic signal that we're looking into putting. And there's also another Britain intersection that we saw as part of the CEQA study of the traffic light that may warrant a traffic signal. So we're looking at like their major corridors, and because of the increased traffic.
But is it safe to say, just so I'm just trying to understand how we're here right now, which is that this wasn't a sort of a top-down, like, hey, what are the most important intersections of the city? What are the biggest ones? What's the priority list? Let's put money against those. It was more that there was a study done in 2013 that happened to identify this intersection. We know it's bad, so why not take it off the list, essentially, but we don't really know if it's...
So we know that this is one really bad intersection.
Yeah, okay.
We are planning to look at more intersections to see with today's traffic how bad they are, what their service level is.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Collins?
Thank you. Just a few more. And I don't know if this is for Joy. I think it's for Joy. Did you study, did you look at the effect of traffic lights on people who are who live close by and are trying to back out of their driveways? Was that something that was part of the study?
So as part of the study, what we did is we looked at the queuing in different direction, and for the eastbound movement, we kept the queue to be exactly the same or less for the westbound direction, For the westbound direction on Eaton, the queue was kept to be exactly the same or less, and for the eastbound direction, the queuing was much lower. So that means that people who were able to back out from their driveway in the existing condition will still be able to back out. And the other thing that I got from the DOT, the Department of Transportation, which basically says that if properly used, traffic signal help reduce a certain type of crash, provides gaps in the traffic stream, benefiting other access point further downstream, and provide right-of-way changes for traffic at intersections. So what it basically is saying is that it provides more gap, and which will help the drivers or the people coming out of their driveways. If there is
Bottom line is, if I live 3 houses up from the corner, can I get out of my driveway?
He says yes.
Yeah, okay. And then the other thing that came up was, did you study whether or not people would change their routes because of the traffic light? Will people start taking different streets now?
So I would say, given the location, since this is a north-south roadway and there is not many north-south roadways that are running parallel to Alameda de la Pulgas, so currently if people are avoiding that intersection due to congestion, they are actually using cut-through the residential streets in order to avoid this intersection. So if that gets improved and people find that they are not being delayed as long as they were delayed earlier, they may come back to the arterial street, which is the Alameda de la Pulgas. So what I'm trying to say is basically the cut-through traffic, which is happening now, might come back to the arterial street, which is the purpose of an arterial street, is to provide connection between the 2 points.
Okay, I think I'll stop there.
Okay, Mr. Norwood, last question.
Yeah, this is just sparked by the conversation that Cameron had with Grace. So I guess it's for Grace. I just want to. I presume that, like most other traffic management, parking management related issues in the city, we essentially use more of a complaint-based system for identifying stuff, right? I mean, we don't. I mean, so there's anecdotal information that comes in, like we're getting a lot of phone calls that there's bad traffic in an area. I know Jay told me once that he was up in some plain looking at stuff, and he could see where, the traffic is really bad. So that's how we prioritize what we study, correct? Because the studies themselves are so expensive, we don't want to just say go off and do 20 studies and figure out what are the 5 worst places in the city.
That is the major driver. When we do get complaints about areas, we have to gather data, we have to do observation, and that could lead to a more formal study.
Right, rather than a blanket kind of study everything kind of thing. Okay, fine. I just wanted to clarify that. Thanks.
Okay, we have 16 people that gave me a card, and there'll probably be more after that. So I'd like to keep everybody around 2 minutes or so, and I'll just name a couple of names. So if we could queue up, that would save a little bit of time. First speaker I have is Gustav Horn, followed by Lisa Ota. Welcome.
Welcome. Thanks. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I appreciate the time. I really want to just respectfully express my opposition to the adoption of this traffic light at this proposed location for a variety of reasons. I do feel that the traffic study is somewhat flawed, and it doesn't really describe the queue depth and nature and how it's going to be effective on the east-west sides of Eaton Avenue. It really does not even take into effect that the southbound traffic, where they do want to make a left turn onto Eaton, there's no possibility for them to do that if they actually do have a green light going northbound, southbound. So I've not seen anything within the traffic study from Joy with regard to queue depth and what are the impacts of having people trying to turn left. And then on top of that, with the platoons of traffic that are going to be basically in favor to go north-south, as I live on Alameda de las Pulgas on the White Oak side, it will make it virtually impossible for me to back out of my driveway when I have accelerating traffic coming from a non-warranted, for my police colleagues here, 25-mile-per-hour arterial road in Redwood City, and it transitions to a 30-mile-per-hour arterial road in San Carlos, where they will be accelerating through this corner and not decelerating. It will make it impossible for me to even get out of my driveway, at least until I see a red light, and then hopefully nobody's going to be trying to turn right to go northbound as well. With that said, I do feel that a stop sign, while it does have its problems, when you are meeting a warrant, and you meet any warrant, one of the solutions are potentially a light, a roundabout, or a stop sign. That's all it says. We have a stop sign. We have very courteous drivers that go through this. I live there. I see it happening. It gives everybody a chance to move freely at their time. And with that said, I think that people coming to a full halt is a lot safer condition than having people driving from 25 to 35 miles an hour north and southbound. And if it's a safety issue, a stop sign is far safer. So I'll just leave it at that. I'm out of time.
Thank you for your comments. Lisa Ota, followed by Daniel Sparson.
Hi. So I've lived in San Carlos since 2001. At the time when I would tell people I lived in San Carlos, everybody would say, like, where is that? Oh, it seems like a nice place. Fast forward to 2014-ish, when I tell people I live in San Carlos, they're like, I know where that is. I cut through there on my way to 280. And when I ask, why do you stop at Eaton? Everybody says the same thing. Oh, because there's a stop sign there and I can get out much quicker, which is awesome, except for I live on Eaton Avenue. I'm the person who admittedly backs my car into my driveway at night because the cars queue up in the morning and nobody will let me out. And I obviously don't want to think about it at 7:30 in the morning, which is now 7:15 in the morning because the traffic is much more horrendous. So I think, Cameron, when you ask the question, what are we solving for? You're solving for commuters who don't actually live in this neighborhood, who are driving through this area because it's faster for them to get through there than Woodside, and it's shorter than Ralston. And they don't have a vested interest in this community. Whereas I have a vested interest in this community. I hope you'll value the community that we have and the people who are opposing this particular project. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Daniel Sparson, followed by Kate Berry.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for letting me speak. So my name is Dan Sparson. I live at the corner of Eaton and Alameda. Excuse me. My major concern here is safety. Wish I drank some water too. I have a child. I have another child on the way, and there's at least a dozen within the block. I also had the privilege, and thank you for setting up, going to the information session just a few days ago. I should point out, I too am an engineer. I have a doctorate in engineering. I work for a networking company, so I know a little bit how things move around in little two-dimensional topologies. So anyway, the point being, I think this problem is not, we're not solving the right problem. A lot of the traffic is generated down at Edgewood. It backs up. I encourage the whole committee here to sit in my front lawn and watch it at 8 a.m. in the morning on a bad day. You'll see that no matter what you do, putting a traffic light in the intersection will not change the queue that builds up because it's Edgewood, which is blocking it. A lot of people want to go up 280. There's a long left light that when you're going northbound on Alameda, you take the left on to go up to 280. If you shorten that, that queue gets longer. There's no way Redwood City's going to want to do that. That's already too long as it is. So I think we're solving the wrong problem here. Also, I think there will be a lot of good points made. I think there's already been some good points now, just to echo them. You know, my wife and I picked San Carlos. We like this, the city of good living, and we like its small town feel. Putting in this traffic light is one thing that starts to break that apart. It's a small thing, admittedly, but it's one thing that keeps adding. I think we should consider that. And finally, you know, not to take too much time, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I don't see it broken. I don't see many people calling for this other than a study which happened to be placed on the list in 2013. And I think it's right to question how we're prioritizing here. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Kate Berry, followed by Stephen Berry.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Kate Berry. I live on Eaton Avenue, just east of Alameda, and have been a resident of San Carlos for 19 years. What drew my husband and me to San Carlos was the charm of a small, sleepy town where we felt safe. Ironically, for the second time in the past few months, my stomach is in knots as I ask City Council to consider the safety of San Carlos residents. Just as I asked you to consider our safety by not letting a gun superstore open in our quiet community, I'm now asking you not to install a light at Eaton and Alameda. I have 2 teenage daughters, one who drives. I live across from neighbors who have teenage daughters who are now also new to driving. They all grew up together on Eaton Avenue. As people will likely barrel down Eaton Avenue to catch the green light, can you assure me our kids will be safe as they get in their cars parked in front of our driveway or in front of our house? Can you assure me that our young drivers will be able to back out of our driveway safely? Do you have studies that show we can expect the average driver speed on Eaton to decrease or at least stay the same and not increase? I am a big dog walker. Anybody who knows me in San Carlos, I walk my dog throughout San Carlos. When I walk, I cross Alameda at 3 points. Eaton, which is a stop sign, Howard, which is a crosswalk only, and Britton, which is a stoplight. My friend and I were nearly hit last week at Britton when crossing Alameda. We had the right-of-way with the crosswalk light at the stoplight. The driver was making a right turn on red and never bothered to look at the crosswalk because she was so busy looking the other way trying to gauge when she could go right on red. Almost got hit. It's not fun. The crosswalk only at Howard is a joke. I've stood knee-deep with moms with baby strollers and dogs, and I'm amazed at how car after car just flies on through that intersection. Often the only way I can get across is to step out and pray like heck that I don't get hit. Of the 3 Alameda crossings, I found the stop sign at Eaton is the safest for me as a walker. I found that unlike the stoplight or crosswalk only, drivers are actually making eye contact with me as they stop. With the installation of a red light at Eaton, how will you ensure pedestrian safety, especially many school kids, Clifford, etc., when cars turn right on red onto Alameda, or when racing to make a left onto Alameda when the light is green? I urge you to consider our pleas for local safety over economic development and easy commutes for people who are pouring onto our local streets. As you allow expansive building to happen in our small town, remember the infrastructure was not created here initially to handle it. We as local taxpayers and residents of the city of good living should not be the ones suffering. I urge you not to install the light.
Thank you for your comments. Stephen Berry, followed by Alex Gordon.
Evening. Thank you for your time. Steve Berry. I attended the community meeting last week. Thank you for putting that together. While the goal was stated that the idea of the light is to relieve congestion on Avenue de las Pulgas, it appears little consideration has been put into how it will impact Eaton and the streets that feed into it. The consultant was unable to answer questions about the impact of adding a light on a street as narrow as Eaton. He said his software couldn't handle figuring out the way the cars are staggered. They couldn't answer how deep the queue would get if I'd have cars in front of my house. We couldn't answer the impact of the cars idling in front of my house for both health and safety. And so even the basic questions of changes to traffic pattern and health and safety can be answered. I don't understand how we can move forward with such a plan. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, sir. Alex Gordon, followed by Amy Strain.
Hi, Alex Gordon. I've been here for 4 years. I'm the happy father of a young daughter, and she's what brings me here today. I want to point out that Eaton Avenue is a narrow and windy street. This street is a windy street with blind corners that cars come around very fast. It's so narrow that two cars cannot pass by each other in opposite directions during most of the day. I cannot tell you how many times I've had to swerve into a parking spot to avoid being crashed into by somebody flying through that street, around a blind corner, through a road that is not wide enough to carry 2 lanes of traffic. My fundamental concern, as I mentioned, is that funneling traffic through Eaton, which is what will happen if you put a light there. As Lisa pointed out, people use this because they think it's the fastest way, but it is not the street to achieve that goal. Again, my fundamental concern is that it's dangerous, number one, to our children who have to contend with cars flying around blind corners. Add more cars, and that makes it worse. When I moved here, my neighbor, who's been here for decades, has told me the story that this is a great street, a great town, but watch out for Eaton and keep your kids safe. As proof, her kid has been hit by a car on Eaton. As I mentioned as well, we also have to worry about the cars that are coming through and simply our safety as drivers on the street that we call home. We have to swerve out of the way of cars that come through far too fast. A light will not make them go slower. A light will make them more of them and make them go faster. Simply put, this street is too narrow and too windy to accommodate additional traffic without negatively affecting public safety. I urge you to consider a different way to address the issue of traffic on Alameda. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Amy Strain, followed by Marie Rosenkrantz.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Thank you again for your time tonight to discuss the proposed traffic signal on Eaton Alameda. Last month, a group of about 10 of us came to you with our concerns about the proposed traffic signal. We each had solid reasons for the opposition. Our concerns range from safety, environment, increased congestion, and the breakdown of our neighborhood atmosphere. We got lucky in that we learned about the proposal through a post for RFPs on the city's website. We were not notified by the city, staff citing that it is not necessary to notify the neighbors for capital improvement projects. And while I understand this is policy, it is certainly not forthcoming and courteous to the residents who are directly impacted by something like this. But following last month's meeting, we created a Move On petition and added the discussion on the Nextdoor site. Today, we have a total of 335 signatures of local residents who are against the traffic signal. Nextdoor responses have reached nearly 100, with 95% of those replying also against the light. And since that time, we have also had time to read the reports, discuss the findings, and many of us are even more steadfast in our position, or in our opposition to this traffic signal today than we were before. Last Thursday, about 25 people gathered at the San Carlos Library to listen to the presentation about the traffic signal, and we were all pretty overwhelmed with the lack of information regarding the congestion Eaton Avenue will face if the traffic light passes. There has been little attention paid to the impacts that Eaton Avenue east of Alameda will endure should this pass. Today, there is little room for 2 cars to fit on the street's current width, so to propose two-way traffic with all the residents' cars that are parked there just seems ludicrous. We believe that this proposed signal is to remedy overflow from the areas, particularly those traveling through our city, and not the residents that live there. The backup on Eaton, as well as the amount of cut-through traffic on our neighboring streets like Emerald, Ruby, Garnet, and Park, will make this section of our city a traffic nightmare. We also feel that by forcing every car to stop as the current situation, we are much safer than if we passed platoons of vehicles driving through our neighborhood at speeds reaching 30 miles per hour without a stop. I am particularly concerned with the idea that we are investing nearly $500,000 of taxpayer money to remedy a problem that truly isn't there. We have backup at peak hours of 8 to 9 a.m. and then again between 5 and 6, but the rest of the day is quiet, peaceful, and relatively safe. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Marie Rosencrans, followed by Thomas McDermott.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. My name is Marie Rosecrans, and I live on Eaton Avenue between Pearl and Ruby. I strongly oppose having a stoplight at the intersection of Alameda de las Pulgas and Eaton. While the four-way stop sign might serve as an inconvenience during school or peak commute hours, adding a stoplight would not only compromise the safety of our narrow street neighborhood by those rushing to make the light, but also negatively impact the aesthetics of our beautiful neighborhood and potentially adversely affect property values. According to a 2015 Wayne State University study, stop signs actually result in better street governance because everyone pays closer attention. I cross through that intersection 2 times daily. Drivers are courteous, and those stop signs are never considered stoptional. I would be remiss if I didn't also bring up how disappointed I am in the handling of this matter. I found out about the stoplight because a considerate and concerned citizen felt compelled to come to my house on a few Sundays ago and tell me about the situation. I expect more of the city administration and most certainly from each of you. I voted for you to represent me and the needs and concerns of my family. When my husband and I did a large-scale construction project on our property, we were obligated to notify our neighbors, set up a meeting in our home to listen to comments, and make adjustments to our plans to account for the dissension. It appears that the city doesn't hold itself to the same notification standards it requires for its citizens. I find this incredibly disappointing. I ask that you not only vote against the stoplight, but also review your communication and notification processes, which are woefully inadequate. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Thomas McDermott, followed by Brandon Ketterman.
Good evening. My name is Thomas McDermott. I live on Eaton Avenue on the west side. I've lived there for 16 years. And I have here the Neighborhood Traffic Management Program document, which has been referred to. It's quite informative. And although we got a lesson on the difference between traffic regulation and traffic calming, some of the key concepts here are interesting. The immediate and overall purpose of traffic management is to reduce speed and or volume of traffic to acceptable levels. Ultimately, the goal is to achieve traffic safety and an enhanced quality of life. And it goes on to talk about how the faster the traffic is, the more prone it is to accidents. When we heard the proposal the other day, it was stated, and it was again stated tonight, that the sole purpose is to maximize the traffic flow in the north-south direction. And the technical analysis on that is very solid, but the goal itself, I think, is very flawed. I would also comment that this is sort of an old topic. I recall back in 2009, there was a proposal to restripe the lines in that intersection to increase the traffic flow in the north-south direction. And thanks to the community involvement at the time and the council at the time who heard that involvement, that was voted down for the sake of safety. And, this issue has bubbled up again in 2014, but I think the studies have all been consistent, maybe for 20 years. It's an intersection that gets backed up at 1 or 2 hours a day, and the other 150 hours a week are, just really quite nice. I think that maybe a broader set of goals can be considered that include quality of life and especially safety and not just the north-south commuter flow. I think maybe some alternative approaches could be considered, how to distribute the problem into a wider area and maybe come up with some ideas and go through the same rigorous simulation process. I'm disappointed that the analysis ignores the past history of the intersection, did not involve the community at all, and even in the meeting on Thursday night when the community asked, did anything said that night influence your opinion? And the answer was no, it did not. That's an interesting remark. And finally, I don't want to be taken as somebody who doesn't want anything to change at all. I know that happens, but I would encourage the council to please reject this proposal now and perhaps initiate a more collaborative process where more input can be gathered from the community, both the local and the extended community, and come up with more creative, appropriate, and holistic solution to the actual problem, which is an hour or two a day, and maybe we can make some improvements in a way that achieves the overall goal of a good living. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Brandon Ketterman, followed by Nicole Ketterman.
for your time. Everyone's been here for a while, but I think it's an important issue to discuss. So I appreciate you guys staying here to discuss it. So I was just going to share really briefly what my commute was like. I too take Edgewood from 280 twice a day. Well, one, in opposing directions. And tonight when I came home around 5:30, I was backed up on Edgewood a little bit, and it took me somewhere between 1 and 2 minutes to get from the backup on Edgewood, the backup on Eaton, and then I turned on Eaton, and I'm actually the second house on the right. So I was going to quantify that initially, but actually the study did it very well for us. 35 seconds. 35 seconds is apparently what we're going to save in commute time, or maybe more specifically what residents in neighboring communities that use San Carlos as a thoroughfare. 35 seconds to me does not seem to justify a $400,000 spend on the part of San Carlos. I know I certainly can find other ways to spend that money. What happened, just getting back to my commute for a second, when I came home, I parked on the street as I do sometimes, and got out, and sure enough, there was a person waiting behind me that did not feel safe going between me and the car on the other side of the street. Noticed her, got onto the sidewalk. Up came about a dozen or so cyclists, no doubt heading probably to Skyline down Edgewood. And if it's not cyclists, it's runners, it's pedestrians, it's my 2 children, ages 1 and 4. It's, dog walkers, people with strollers, etc. Eaton is a very popular street to walk on. It abuts a creek, so there are no side streets. It is absolutely, it is one of the most popular places to walk and to travel in the city. And, given the scope of this problem as being, I think, has been demonstrated to be pretty minimal, I think we're focused on merely solving a problem which arguably isn't there, without any analysis to what appear to be pretty likely to occur detrimental consequences, most importantly being the safety to our residents, and particularly our young residents. Because I don't know about you guys, but I think I'm a pretty good dad. I can't keep an eye on 2 kids, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I would just be mortified if one of my kids went into the intersection and was struck by a car. So I kindly and respectfully request that you consider opposing this proposed stoplight. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Nicole Ketterman, followed by Grace Spiridon.
So I live one house away from the intersection on Eaton. I have 2 little boys and a dog, and I watch this intersection through my kitchen window all the time. And so I see that during the morning commute, during the evening commute, it's backed up, but the rest of the day, the weekends, the evenings, there's rarely a queue of cars there at that intersection. The study information that we saw that saved us 35 seconds per passing was only during the peak hours. I think maybe just one morning hour. And so I don't feel that study was valid, really, for the impact on our community and the safety of our families. I feel like the stop sign for us is a big safety measure. I live, on the right side as you go down Eaton, just as people come around Edgewood, it's a blind turn. So if they don't stop and have to speed back up again, if they can just go straight, I worry about if my child or my dog goes into the street, they won't have time to stop. So I respectfully ask that you don't approve this and look into more safety measures if you do decide. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Grace Spiridon, followed by Greg Amon.
Hello, good evening, Mayor and council members. Thank you so much for your time and listening to this. I can't even put into words how great everyone's spoken so far, so I'll just echo something similar that you probably have heard. I've lived on Eaton for about 3 years now with my husband and my 2 twin daughters who are 3. We chose San Carlos for its safety, for its community, and so far have been so happy with the safety that we feel when we walk up and down the street. This stoplight not only makes me feel uncomfortable, but it also makes me feel different in terms of how I respect the decisions that we're making, and I urge you to reconsider other options at this point. In terms of the data, for a living, I do stuff with data and stuff, and, hearing how we've approached this data, allows me to think of different things like seasonality. Have we considered when school's not even in session? I live there. There's no traffic really at that time. Have we considered also trends when we look forward to the future? By 2020, they talk about how 40% of people will be working from home. So therefore, by this point, traffic may go down. I think when we think of the $400,000 that San Carlos will be investing, I think I've heard a lot of great things talked about tonight, and it sounds like there's other opportunities to spend that money in a different way and potentially think about different ways to spend that money to make this intersection, maybe flow the traffic a little differently. But I urge you to reconsider putting in a stoplight. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Greg Amman, followed by Teresa Teresa F. Sorry. Welcome.
Mayor and Council, I'm here to voice my opposition to the proposed stoplight at Alameda and Eaton. I'm a Redwood City resident, however, I live at the northwest corner of the intersection in question with my wife Grace and my twin daughters. I feel like this is solving a problem that is only an issue 2 hours a day on a weekday and not at all on the weekends. The stop sign currently in place works well for traffic and the safety of nearby children as well as pedestrians and cyclists. Most notably because it serves to consistently slow down traffic, which avoids any incidents of a high-speed collision. It was noted that the one warrant that was not satisfied was crash. Was there any analysis to the reason why the crash was not met? Is it because of the stop sign? We never really got an answer on that on Thursday. To Mayor Grisilli's comment regarding the traffic at the intersection this morning, from the study, I quote, "The simulation is based on the existing morning peak hour volumes on Thursday, March 24th, 2016. So just over 2 years to the day this morning, the mayor saw no traffic. I was putting my kids in their car at 8 a.m. this morning, and I saw no more than 5 cars in any direction backed up at that intersection. And I believe to the engineer and city staff's point, peak hours are between 7 and 9, so I was smack dab right in the middle of that peak hour. Safety's been mentioned many times, but again, it seems that safety maybe is not an issue at that intersection, and is that not an issue because of the stop sign? So I'd really like to point that out. Also, I'd like to follow up on Joy's comment regarding decrease of stop times during peak time. If a stoplight is put in, it seems to me that if it's decreased during the stop time is decreased during peak time, there's the potential for it to be increased during off-peak times, especially if they're not going to be turning that into a flashing signal during the day. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Teresa, followed by Jennifer Steinberg. Apologize, I wasn't sure how to.
That's all right. Thank you for your time. I'm Teresa Fu. I live on Eaton. Yeah, Fu like Kung Fu. So I'm so glad to see so many people here. I understand that traffic is not ideal at that intersection. I used to drive it for work. But like so many people have said, it's really only an issue for like less than 5% of the day. And the rest of the time it's super quiet. With all due respect, the city engineer and the study engineer, the focus exclusively on this traffic is nothing about like the quality of life, safety of the other people who live around there. I'm about 4 houses down. I actually suspect that if you use the warrant criteria, many of our intersections in San Carlos would probably meet one of the warrants. And so are we going to be putting signals up everywhere? I don't think so. Like my husband said earlier, Eaton is really not designed to be a collector street. It's about 1.5 lanes wide, and there's many cars parked on the side. It's too windy. It's too narrow. I'm a runner. I go up and down that street. Like Kate Berry said, I feel much safer crossing Alameda with a stop sign and not like necessarily a stoplight. I basically think that you're just inviting bad behavior associated with a stoplight into a quiet residential neighborhood. I think we heard earlier from the sheriff that people run red lights, gun through yellow lights. We're inviting that into a neighborhood that it's not designed to basically see that. I think you guys have heard us. You understand that this is an issue that's really only a problem for a few minutes a day, less than an hour a day. You're taking 45 seconds out of somebody's commute to actually increase our problems, which is the people that live in that area. So I urge you to reject the stoplight and look at other solutions. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Jennifer Steinberg, followed by Robert Stafford.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Steinberg. I'm a longtime resident of San Carlos. I actually grew up here, and I'm lucky enough to be able to raise my family here. I live on Eaton Avenue on the east side, about a house away from the proposed stoplight. And I'm really concerned that by putting in a stoplight there, we're actually going to have major problems with traffic, specifically in that area, because it's such a narrow intersection, and because the signal is going to be timed with Edgewood, we're going to have a pileup of cars in this area. And if one person parks on one side, basically people who are trying to make a right and to go east on Eaton, they're not going to be able to get through this intersection if one person parks on the side of the street because cars are queuing. So I'm just really concerned. And I urge the City Council to reject this plan. I also would like the City Council, if you guys do reject it, to maybe look at doing a roundabout. I think this would solve a lot of issues. I disagree with the fact that the intersection's narrow. I think the intersection's really, really large. Though I don't want to see my neighbor's frontage being pulled back, I think that a roundabout would actually be feasible. And I want to also thank the city for having that meeting last week. I found it really informational, but I wish it was done many months ago, or actually years ago when we were first planning the signal, and I wish we were notified at that point. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Robert Stafford, followed by Peter Williams.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. The other day, someone remarked that with three of you going out, it's a lame duck session. There's nothing to decide. I think tonight's events tell you that this is a full issue for a variety of reasons. When you look at the collaborative nature of what's being proposed, what's missing is the analysis that starts at Edgewood. The setback requirements for 36 inches, it's a blind intersection, aren't being observed. There's a fire hydrant in the middle of the sidewalk. So when you watch kids try to ride their bikes, they can't. They're pushed out into the street. What's missing tonight is what Cameron said, is what's the focus? For me, I have my own traffic consultant, and he's one of the top ones, and he said this takes it from an F to a D. Now, in and of itself, you'd say, well, that's not enough. But what he added was the safety factor for children pedestrians. What's missing tonight is Gabrielle Mendoza. I don't think anyone knows who she is. She's the person that stands on the corner of Edgewood and Alameda every day. She's a mother from Clifford. She did it for the first year for free because she said it was like going through a gauntlet each day. She finally got paid. It should be noted that, Clifford is a pass-through school. When the old boys in golf pants cut up the county, they kept that Redwood City. So we have children coming primarily from the east side, a minority community, going through a gauntlet, going through San Carlos, arriving at Clifford, in an area that is, as everyone has said, is extremely dangerous. But then the question is it better to have a light to slow it down? I would submit that a sidewalk from Edgewood and Alameda to Eaton with proper markings for biking would be a noted improvement. If you ask Gabrielle Mendoza, which by the way, she said not one person has spoken to her, a precipient witness, the person that would know the most, no one will talk to her. She said, this is, it's a madhouse. I think the backups are going to be there regardless. The question is, what's going to be safer? Public Works is just that. I stand in support of the light for the reason that I think it will make things safer. Go down to Palo Alto, the biking town of the capital, and they have lights all over, and it's a safer place to ride. So I'm tentatively in support of this light, and I think Grace Lee has actually done a great job, and it's hard to do it.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Peter Williams. Mr. Williams, you're still here? He's gone. Okay. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on this item? All right. We'll go from there. I know there's one question that got generated in my brain. I don't know why I missed it. So you're going north and south on, right now, you're north and south in Alameda. When I'm going south and I want to take a left on at Eaton, I have a stop sign. There's only one lane. Well, there's sort of a little, almost like two lanes, but there's one lane. And then guy stops, They stop, I go left, okay? Coming north, there's an actual left-hand turn lane, but still, it's a stop. Everybody, you have to look all the three ways, and then you go. What's going to happen when there's a green light? Because that's going to I can guarantee you, I've seen people, I've been on the road when it's backed up all the way to St. Francis, going south, okay? And people go, I'm not waiting in this line, I'm cutting over St. Francis. I've seen them cut over, okay? So this would help, theoretically a light would help that, but not if you're going to, how are you going to handle the people taking a left on Eaton or a left on Eaton either way?
So it will be typical permitted phasing.
No, say it slower. Typical
permitted phasing where the left.
I'm sorry.
Permitted
okay.
phasing where a left turn actually waits for a gap in the through traffic in the opposite direction, and then
that's going to
makes
back
the
that
left turn.
sucker up a long way. Okay. So there's not going to be a left-hand line. There's not going to be an arrow.
There's not
going to be an arrow. Lane.
That's correct.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right, other questions from the dais here? We'll wrap it up. Any questions? All right, well, let's, gentlemen, what do you want to do? Well, make a motion if you want.
All right, I'll make a motion.
Let it die.
I move to adopt Resolution 2018-39, a resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos approving the plans and specifications for the traffic signal at Alameda de los Pulgos and Eaton Avenue, Project C9818, authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement with Redgwick Construction Company of Oakland in the amount of $510,612.50, appropriating $161,000 from the General Capital Fund 25 unassigned fund balance to the project budget C9818 and authorizing the expenditure of a construction budget with contingencies in the amount of $596,000.
Okay, is there a second?
Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to remind you about the comment that Tara Peterson made about that we'd like you to add a recital to the motion that about the fact that CEQA study was completed in August of 2017 and found that this project had a categorical exemption.
I'm sorry, I forgot that. Mr. Collins, will you add that to your motion?
So added. Can you just clear one thing up for me, Craig? Did you say a categorical exemption?
Yes.
Tell me, what does that mean?
Well, under CEQA there are statutory and categorical exemptions. This project was studied and it was determined to be under the categorical exemption for existing facilities. The streetscape and the intersection is an existing facility, and the finding in the determination was that the project would reduce the traffic service level from D to B.
Okay. All right. Yes, so amended.
So amended, okay. Is there a second to this motion? Hearing no second, there's no resolution. Is that correct?
No, the resolution's not approved. What I think there's reason for this to be determined by the council if the council so decides to negatively not approve this project. What I'd like to do is have, because you don't have a resolution before you to reject it, I'd like you to do tonight do a vote that you are tentatively not approving, if that's the determination of the council, unless there's some other resolution, and then we would bring back a resolution to you consistent with the public testimony tonight that has all the relevant findings and information in it, and then you would approve that either on the consent calendar probably at your next meeting.
So basically you want one of us to make a motion to deny the resolution, or
to not approve the signal and not approve the action of approving the contract, okay. And then direct us to bring back a formal resolution for
as you say. Okay, so is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
All right, is there a second?
I second.
All right, moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
Mr. Mayor.
Sure, Mr.
Yeah, I just want to say, I appreciate everyone coming out tonight and speaking. Our city staff are doing essentially what we asked them to do at a very high level, which is that traffic congestion is a concern throughout the city. It's particularly concerned during commute hours, and they're looking for ways to improve traffic congestion. And that's what we want them to do. We want them to continue to do it. We all benefit from it. But they also have to make a case to the neighborhood that it's the right thing to do. And in this case, it's very clear to me that we haven't succeeded to do that. That's not to say that, I think that this intersection will continue to get worse over time. And I think that we should continue to look at ways to improve it. We should work with the community to find ways that are acceptable to the community to do that. And so I appreciate you coming out and talking to us. I hope that you understand that the city staff, for people who express a lot of frustration with the city government, we're here trying to solve the basic quality of life problems, and the signal that we get back from the community is that traffic congestion is a problem. And so that's where this comes from. But I think this is an example of the process working. We listen to all of you, I think, and we're not going to take this specific action tonight, but I do hope we don't just put this intersection away and say, let's never look at it and try to improve it, because there is a traffic problem during commute hours, and we should try and improve it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Collins?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I'm that council member that lives closest to this intersection. I live on Chestnut, and I come up St. Francis Way all the time. Thankfully, there were no speakers here who live on Garnet, because I would be apologizing to those people for using their street all the time. And I will confess that I, for a long time, have actually thought a light was a good idea. But in my house, that I only have 50% of the vote, and even there, it's one yes and one no. But the traffic is bad. Everybody agrees with that, and we have to do something. If it's warranted, I would love to see a signal, or not a signal, but a stop sign at St. Francis and Alameda. I would stop using Garnet. I'd stop going on Eaton. That remains to be seen, but in the long run, this is an intersection where, traffic regulation, yes, safety, that's a feature of it. But we're all elected to represent 29,500 people of this town, and I respect the fact that there were 330 plus people that signed a petition, but there are people who live on Wellington that drive down Alameda. There are people who live on Hull Drive that drive down Alameda, and we represent them too. So at some point, we're going to be having to take all of those commuters, those people that use use that street in our city, into consideration. When this comes back to us again, everybody's going to have another bite at the apple. But I want people to understand that it's not an easy decision for any of us, but sometimes you have to do, and we may or may not do, I'm only one vote, but we may do something that a lot of people disagree with. That was the case on Holly Street. We had 40 or 50 really angry people when we restriped it. A lot of other people in town thanked us for it. I don't know that will have the same outcome here. But again, we need to look at the whole picture. So we'll wait and see how it comes out.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Mr. Olbert?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to, partially echo a little bit of what my two colleagues have just said, and maybe add something else that may be a little bit different. It's something I think a lot of you probably understand and appreciate, which is that we are all parts of multiple communities. We aren't just neighborhoods. Okay, newsflash, San Carlos is not centered around Eaton and Alameda. It's not centered around Chestnut and Magnolia, where I live, either. It's a bigger community than that. And we each have roles that we play and interests that we have at different levels. My unwillingness to support the measure tonight was actually driven by one simple thing, which I actually appreciate you guys having emphasized so much, because it was something I hadn't really considered before, which is that this plan, to my mind, didn't really account for what it was going to do to traffic on Eaton, okay? And I fully understand that, let me put it this way. If Eaton was a Britton Avenue, a nice straight road, I would have voted for it regardless. I would have said, yeah, I know you guys may be really unhappy, but just like Ron just said, we're part of larger communities, and we have to serve everybody, not just the folks that live there. But Eaton was never really intended to be a road like Britain, okay? And yet there's a decent possibility from everything I've heard from the experts that if we do something, if we put a traffic light in at Eaton and Alameda, we might be shifting it that way. So my feedback to staff in this case is that I think that that element of this exercise got missed. And frankly, I'm not suggesting that we go off and spend another chunk of money on a traffic study. We can wait till the next time people get up in arms about it to do that. But if a plan came forward and included addressing that issue about what do we do about not boosting traffic on Eaton, maybe finding ways to decrease traffic on Eaton, because if really what we're trying to do is to get people to be more easily flowing through an Alameda over to Britain where we sort of want them to go, fine, I'd be okay with that. I want to be honest with you, I'd be okay with that even if the rest of you are like, I don't want flashing lights in my night, I'd say, I'm really sorry about that, but we're part of a bigger community and that's not a bad trade-off. This trade-off to me isn't good enough because it doesn't answer that question, which is what are we going to do at Eaton? So thank you very much for spending all the time and effort getting involved and petitioning us and getting all the information in front of us, because that was not something I had really considered. And wherever we go from here, I thank you for doing that.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Mr. Grocott?
Yeah, just three things. Also, thank you for all of you who came out tonight to speak up for your neighborhood. Somebody said that they were disappointed in us for not notifying them about this going on. And I will tell you, when we were at the last council meeting and it was said, oh, this had been before the council, I went and talked to the city manager afterwards and I said, I've been on this council 16 years and I don't remember this coming before us. And he, explained, well, that's because this project really was in a basket, if you will, and with other projects. And so it could have easily gotten, I know by me, I didn't notice it. So I had no idea this was going on until I got an email from somebody out here saying, what is going on and why didn't we know about it? So some of us didn't know about it either. And the last thing I just wanted to say, somebody mentioned, I think he's left, about there being what's the lame duck, because three of us aren't going to be here in about 9 months or so, 8 months. I saw some impressive people get up and speak tonight, and there's right now only 3 candidates that have signed up to be council, to run, and there won't be an election if that's the case, because there's 3 seats that'll be vacated. So some of you ought to think about that.
Okay. I echo really all my colleagues' comments. Someone came up to me, I won't say who, at a social event and asked me what people should do if they didn't think it should happen. And I encouraged them to do exactly what you did. You organized, you came out, you got 300 signatures, we heard you. I do want to say also to staff, though, this is not something where it's winners and losers, and I hope you understand that. I think Grace does for sure, and hopefully you do too, sir. It's a situation of community and what community wants. But as was mentioned, today it's this way, tomorrow it might not be. You have to make sure that we try to do the right thing if we can. It is quite honestly, I think most of the traffic is, and I've told people this about San Carlos Avenue and about Britain and a few other places, and certainly it is in Belmont and Ralston. There's a lot of people going through here. There's a lot of people going through the towns, and I come down, like I said, Edgewood a number of times, try to take a left, but it's difficult. The main thing is you organized, you came out, we heard you. That's not always going to be the case where you're going to be on the, should we say, the positive side or the winning side, but that's the only way this works. If no one comes out and no one is in this area and no one emails us and no one calls us, then we're in a vacuum. We think, oh, it's great and wonderful. And I honestly thought that when I started with this project that it was a positive project, and I still don't think it's a negative one, but hearing from all of the folks that came out and my colleagues' comments and questions, I ended up being on the no side on this one. So we have a motion on the floor.
Could we just repeat the motion since
sure.
it's...
Greg, Greg, can you help us repeat the motion?
Let me just read the proposed motion. I'm going to put it in a negative. That's my intention here. So the motion would be to not approve plans and specifications for a traffic signal at Alameda de las Pulgas and Eaton Avenue, Project 9818, and not authorizing execution of an agreement with Redgwick Construction Company, and not appropriating the funds for the project.
All right. And who was the motion maker?
You were. And the formal motion is going to come back to you at the next meeting. I'm going to bring a formal motion back to you next meeting.
Okay. I think Matt was the motion maker.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's right.
And you were the second?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have any more discussion? All right. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
And Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. All right. Thank you very much. We have a couple of more items here. Council members' reports, subcommittees, regional boards. Oh, I don't think we don't have time for the website presentation tonight. No, it's gone. It's gone. Yeah. Thank you so much. Anyway, council members' reports. Any council members' reports? I'm sorry.
I just wanted to say that I thought you did a fine job at the State of the City.
$29.95 DVD this week only. All right. Thanks, folks. Staff, administrative business? Nothing? All right. If there's no other items, then we will be adjourned until next time. Thank you.